Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to support us. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. Now let's get into the case. Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. Before we begin today's story, I'd like to ask for your support by subscribing to the channel. Your subscription is very important to us, so please subscribe to support us. Also, leave a comment letting me know which city you're watching from. Now let's get into the case. The morning air carried the distinct scent of pine and damp earth as Jason Parker loaded his tools into the bed of the Forest Service truck. At 34, he had been working trail maintenance in Glacier National Park for nearly 7 years, and the routine had become as familiar to him as the calluses on his hands. The early August sun had just begun to crest the jagged peaks of the Lewis Range, casting long shadows across the maintenance yard where several other park employees prepared for their day. Jason checked his watch, 6:15 a.m. His supervisor, Frank Wilcox, had scheduled a morning briefing in 15 minutes, but Jason wanted to ensure his equipment was ready beforehand. He methodically went through his checklist: hard hat, work gloves, safety glasses, first aid kit, two-way radio, lunch pack, and 3 liters of water. The night before, he had sharpened his hand pruners and packed a small whetstone to maintain the edge on his folding saw throughout the day. Trail maintenance in the backcountry required self-sufficiency, especially when working the more remote sections of Glacier's extensive trail system. "Morning, Parker," called out Debbie Sanderson, a wildlife biologist who often coordinated with the trail crews. She approached with a steaming travel mug in hand, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. "Headed up to Grinnell today?" Jason nodded, securing a loop of bright yellow marking tape to his pack. "Yeah, Frank's got me clearing that section between the lake and the glacier viewpoint. Some deadfall reported after those storms last week." "Keep your eyes open," Debbie cautioned, her expression turning serious. "We've had several grizzly sightings in that area. A sow with 2 cubs was spotted near the berry patches above the first bridge." "I'll keep the bear spray handy," Jason assured, her patting the holster attached to his belt. 7 years in grizzly country had taught him to respect the massive predators, but familiarity hadn't bred complacency. Every season brought stories of close encounters, though actual attacks remained rare. Still, he had witnessed enough from a distance to maintain a healthy respect for the bear's power and unpredictability. The morning briefing went quickly. Frank, a weathered veteran of the Park Service with 26 years under his belt, assigned tasks with his usual efficiency. 8 trail workers dispersed across the million-acre park, each with specific sections to maintain. Jason's assignment took him to the popular Grinnell Glacier Trail, a 7.6-mile round-trip route with stunning views of alpine lakes and the rapidly receding glacier. Summer storms had brought down several trees, and hikers had reported difficult passage in some areas. With peak tourist season underway, keeping the trails clear and safe was a priority. "Radio check-ins every 2 hours, Frank reminded them as the meeting concluded. "Weather looks good today, but they're calling for afternoon thunderstorms tomorrow, so let's get as much done as we can." He glanced at Jason. "Parker, you've got the most remote section today. How's your bear spray?" "Full canister. Tested the trigger mechanism yesterday," Jason replied. Frank nodded. "Good man, remember, make noise on the blind corners. Most bear encounters happen when you surprise them." The drive to the trailhead took 40 minutes along the Going to the Sun road, the park's scenic highway that carved through the heart of the mountains. Even at this early hour, the parking area at the Many Glacier Hotel showed signs of the day's coming crowd, with early hikers preparing their gear and snapping photos of the stunning mountain backdrop reflected in Swift Current Lake. Jason parked the Forest Service truck in the designated area, slung his pack onto his shoulders, and secured his tools. The first 2 miles of the trail were relatively easy, climbing gradually alongside Swift Current Lake and then Lake Josephine. Jason maintained a steady pace, occasionally stopping to clear small branches or kick loose rocks from the path. The morning air remained cool in the shadows of the towering peaks, but as the sun rose higher, sweat began to bead on his forehead. He pulled off his hard hat briefly to wipe his brow with a bandana, taking a moment to appreciate the pristine beauty surrounding him. This was why he had chosen this job, despite the modest pay. The office views couldn't be beaten. Crystal-clear lakes reflecting snow-capped mountains, meadows exploding with wildflowers in summer, and the chance to see wolves, mountain goats, bighorn sheep, and yes, even the occasionally nerve-wracking grizzly bear. Growing up in western Montana, Jason had developed an early appreciation for wilderness that had only deepened with time. Around 9:30 a.m., he reached the first significant obstruction, a lodgepole pine that had fallen across the high trail, likely during the lightning storm that had passed through the previous week. The 12-inch diameter trunk completely blocked the path. Jason assessed the situation, then set to work with his folding saw. The rhythmic rasping sound echoed off the rocky slopes as he methodically cut through the wood, creating sections that he could roll off the trail. The work was physically demanding but satisfying. By the time he had cleared the fallen tree and continued up the trail, the day had warmed considerably. He paused at a small stream crossing to refill his water bottle, adding the purification tablets that were standard procedure for backcountry water sources. While waiting for the tablets to dissolve, he radioed in his first check-in of the day. "Parker to base. I'm at mile marker 3 on Grinnell. Cleared one significant deadfall. Continuing to the upper section. Over." The radio crackled with static before Frank's voice responded. "Copy that, Parker. Any wildlife sightings?" "Over. Negative on large mammals. Couple of marmots and a golden eagle overhead. Out." Jason continued his hike, the trail now climbing more steeply as it switched back up toward Grinnell Glacier. The path narrowed in sections, with cliff faces to one side and steep drop-offs to the other. He moved carefully, noting areas where erosion had undercut the trail edge, another maintenance issue he would address on the return trip. The landscape opened into a wider valley as he approached the 4-mile mark. Here the trail straightened and traversed a section of dense huckleberry patches, the bushes heavy with ripe fruit. Jason slowed his pace, suddenly more alert. Berry patches in August were prime feeding grounds for bears, particularly grizzlies, bulking up before winter hibernation. This was exactly the kind of area Debbie had warned about. He unholstered his bear spray, holding it ready in his right hand while he continued walking. Following protocol, he began making noise, calling out, "Hey bear, coming through!" The sharp, loud warning was intended to alert any nearby animals to his presence, reducing the chance of a surprise encounter. Jason rounded a bend in the trail, still calling out when he stopped cold. 30 feet ahead, a massive grizzly bear stood on all fours amid the huckleberry bushes, its mouth stained purple from the fruit. The animal's distinctive shoulder hump identified it unmistakably as Ursus arctos horribilis, the grizzly bear, one of North America's most powerful predators. Time seemed to slow as Jason's training kicked in. The bear, a male he estimated, at over 600 pounds, had not yet shown signs of aggression. It appeared more surprised than threatened, its small eyes examining Jason with what seemed like curiosity rather than malice. Jason's heart hammered in his chest, but he kept his breathing under control, knowing that his next actions could determine whether this remained a peaceful encounter or turned dangerous. "Hey, bear," he said in a calm, firm voice, not shouting, now but making sure he was heard. "Just passing through." Slowly, telegraphing his movements, he began to back away, maintaining eye contact with the grizzly, but not staring directly into its eyes, a gesture that could be interpreted as a challenge. The bear watched him, head slightly lowered, ears forward. For a moment, Jason thought the encounter would end peacefully. The bear took a step to the side, seeming to consider returning to its feast of berries. Then something changed. Perhaps it was a shift in the wind carrying Jason's scent more strongly to the animal, or simply the unpredictable nature of wild creatures, but the bear's demeanor transformed in an instant. It dropped its massive head, ears flattening against its skull. Warning signs Jason recognized immediately. "Easy, bear," he said, continuing his slow retreat while raising the can of bear spray to chest level, thumb on the safety tab. The grizzly huffed, a deep, chuffing sound that sent adrenaline surging through Jason's body. Then, with startling speed for an animal so large it charged. Jason had been trained for this moment, had run through the scenario dozens of times in safety drills, but the reality of 600 pounds of muscle and claw bearing down on him tested every nerve. He held his ground until the bear was approximately 20 feet away, close enough for the spray to be effective, but hopefully with enough time to deter the charge. He flipped off the safety and pressed the trigger, releasing a cloud of capsaicin spray that expanded into the space between them. The red-tinged mist caught the sunlight as it traveled toward the oncoming grizzly, but a slight breeze curved its trajectory just enough that only the edge of the cloud reached the animal's face. The bear faltered momentarily, shaking its head at the irritating chemical, but its momentum and determination carried it forward. Jason turned to his right, angling away from the trail's edge while continuing to spray. but the bear was upon him before he could establish sufficient distance. The impact felt like being hit by a motorcycle. The grizzly's shoulder slammed into Jason's left side, sending him sprawling onto the rocky ground, knocking the wind from his lungs. His hard hat went flying as he rolled instinctively, trying to protect his vital areas. The training mantra played in his mind: if it's brown, lie down, the standard advice for grizzly encounters that turn violent. Jason curled into a protective ball, face down with his hands clasped over the back of his neck, elbows protecting the sides of his head. Through the fabric of his work jacket, he felt the terrifying pressure of teeth closing over his left shoulder, not yet puncturing deeply, but testing, applying increasing force. The bear's breath was hot against his neck, carrying the musky odor of its body and the sweet scent of huckleberries. Then came the pain, sharp and electric, as claws raked across his back, shredding his jacket and the skin beneath in 4 parallel lines. Jason bit down on a scream, knowing that excessive noise might further agitate the bear. Instead, he remained as still as possible, playing dead despite every instinct screaming at him to fight or flee. The grizzly released his shoulder, snorting and pacing around him. Jason maintained his protective position, even as he felt warm blood soaking through his torn clothing. The bear huffed again, close to his ear, its breath stirring his hair. A massive paw batted at his side, rolling him partially over before he could tighten back into a ball. The movement exposed his chest, and the bear took advantage, its claws catching the front of his jacket and tearing through to the flesh beneath. White-hot pain flared across Jason's torso as skin and muscle parted under the razor-sharp claws. This time he couldn't suppress a cry of agony, the sound echoing off the surrounding rock faces. The grizzly responded with a low growl, standing over him with its enormous weight pressing down on his legs. For what felt like an eternity, but was likely only seconds, the bear continued its investigation, nudging and prodding with its nose and paws. Jason remained motionless except for the uncontrollable trembling of shock and adrenaline. Blood pooled beneath him, the copper scent sharp in his nostrils. He felt lightheaded, consciousness threatening to slip away, but he fought to remain aware, knowing that survival might depend on his continued ability to respond appropriately. Finally, the pressure on his legs eased. Through barely open eyes, Jason glimpsed the bear moving away, stopping to look back at him from a few yards distance. It stood on its hind legs briefly, reaching its full height of over 7 feet, sniffing the air as if ensuring no other threats were present. Then, with surprising indifference for an animal that had just demonstrated such violence, it dropped to all fours and ambled back toward the huckleberry patch, occasionally glancing back at Jason's motionless form. He remained still, counting his shallow breaths, forcing himself to wait until the bear had moved a safe distance away. The pain was all-encompassing now, radiating from his shoulder, back and chest in pulsing waves that threatened to overwhelm his consciousness. But with the pain came clarity. He was alive, and now he needed to stay that way. After 5 minutes that felt like hours, with the bear now visible only as a brown shape among distant bushes, Jason carefully reached for the radio clipped to his belt. His fingers came away slick with blood, but the device appeared undamaged. With trembling hands, he raised it to his lips and pressed the transmit button. "Emergency," he managed, his voice a raspy whisper. "This is Parker. Bear attack on Grinnell Trail, approximately 4 miles in. Need immediate assistance. He paused, assessing his condition. "I'm hurt pretty bad." The radio crackled with an immediate response. "Parker, this is base. Copy your emergency. Stay on the line. Are you in a safe location? Is the bear still present?" "Bear has moved off," Jason replied, each word an effort through the pain. "About 50 yards away now, still in sight." "Roger that. Do not attempt to move unless the bear approaches again. We're dispatching emergency response now. Can you describe your injuries?" Jason conducted a mental inventory, cataloging the damage he could feel. Lacerations to back, chest, and left shoulder. Bleeding, significant bleeding. No obvious broken bones, but everything hurts. Understood. If possible, apply pressure to the worst bleeding areas. Help is on the way. Estimated time to your location is approximately 40 minutes for the first responders. Can you remain conscious that long? "I'll try," Jason said, the effort of speaking becoming more difficult as shock settled deeper into his system. "I have first aid kit in my pack." With agonizing slowness, he maneuvered to reach the small emergency kit in his backpack, which had remained strapped to his shoulders throughout the attack. The movement sent fresh waves of pain through his torn muscles, but he persisted, finally extracting the compact package. Inside, were the basics: gauze pads, roller bandages, antiseptic wipes, medical tape, and a space blanket. Not nearly enough for injuries of this severity, but better than nothing. Jason tore open packages of gauze with his teeth, then pressed the absorbent material against the worst of the chest wounds, securing it as best he could with shaking hands. The effort left him exhausted and dizzy. He glanced toward where he had last seen the bear, relieved to find it still occupied with the berries, paying him no further attention. The summer sun beat down on him, but he felt increasingly cold, a bad sign he recognized as shock setting. Sensibly, he unfolded the space blanket one-handed, its reflective surface crinkling loudly in the mountain air, and draped it over his body. The simple action depleted his remaining energy reserves. As he lay back, fighting to stay awake, the magnitude of what had happened began to register fully. He had encountered one of nature's most formidable predators and survived, at least so far. The next hour would determine whether that survival was temporary or permanent. Time passed in a haze of pain and semi-consciousness. Jason forced himself to respond each time the radio crackled with check-ins from base, providing what information he could about his location and condition. He noticed with detached interest that the bear had finally wandered out of sight, disappearing into the forest on the far side of the berry patch. The immediate danger had passed, but his battle was far from over. He focused on breathing, slow, measured inhalations and exhalations that helped manage both the pain and his growing anxiety. Each breath sent fresh stabs of agony through his chest, where the bear's claws had torn the flesh. But the act of controlling his breathing gave him something to concentrate on, besides the spreading pool of blood beneath him and the increasingly dire situation. The gauze pads he had applied were already soaked through, but he had no energy to replace them. Instead, he pressed his hand weakly against the largest wound, applying what little pressure he could manage. His thoughts turned to his family, his parents in Missoula, his younger sister in Seattle. Would they blame the bear, the park? He hoped not. He had chosen this job knowing the risks, however remote they might have seemed on ordinary days. The sound of voices pulled him from his drifting thoughts. At first, he wondered if he was hallucinating, but then the radio at his side crackled. "Parker, this is Ranger Schmidt with First Response Team. We're approaching your position. Can you make any noise or signal to help us locate you?" Jason reached for the radio but found he lacked the strength to lift it. Instead, he called out, his voice weak but audible in the mountain stillness. "Here, I'm here." Within minutes, two figures appeared on the trail, park rangers in their distinctive uniforms, moving with purpose, each carrying emergency medical equipment. Behind them came two more figures in the red jackets of the park's emergency medical team. "Over here," one of the rangers called to his companions, spotting Jason's reflective blanket. They approached cautiously, scanning the surroundings for any sign of the bear. "Parker, Jason," the first ranger knelt beside him, experienced eyes quickly assessing the situation. "I'm Ranger Schmidt. We're going to take care of you." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. The medical team worked efficiently, cutting away Jason's blood-soaked clothing to reveal the full extent of his injuries. They applied proper pressure dressings to the wounds, established an IV line to begin replacing lost fluids, and carefully immobilized his neck and spine as a precaution. "Bear's been gone about 30 minutes, Jason managed to tell them as they worked. "Went that way." He tried to gesture toward the forest, but found his arm wouldn't respond properly. "Don't worry about that now," Schmidt assured him. "Wildlife management team is already on site, tracking the animal's movement. Our priority is getting you to medical care." "How bad?" Jason asked, looking up at the EMT monitoring his vital signs. The woman gave him a professionally reassuring smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "You've got some significant lacerations, but you did everything right. Staying still, probably, saved your life. We need to get you to a hospital for proper treatment, but you're stable for transport." Transport, Jason soon learned, meant a helicopter evacuation. While two rangers secured a landing zone in a nearby clearing, the medical team prepared him for movement. They transferred him onto a portable stretcher, securing straps across his body to prevent any shifting during the journey. The pain when they lifted him was excruciating, despite the medications they had administered through the IV. The distinctive thump, thump, thump of helicopter blades announced the arrival of the air ambulance. Jason caught glimpses of a sleek red and white machine settling onto the improvised landing zone, stirring the alpine vegetation with its powerful downwash. Two flight medics jogged from the helicopter, carrying additional equipment. After a brief consultation with the park's medical team, the flight medics took over Jason's care, They rechecked his vital signs, adjusted his IV, and administered additional pain medication before preparing for the transfer to the helicopter. "We're flying you to Kalispell Regional," one of the flight medics explained as they secured his stretcher. "They have a level 2 trauma center that can handle these injuries. Flight time is about 20 minutes, just hang in there." The journey to the helicopter was a gauntlet of pain. Each step the bearers took sending jolts through Jason's lacerated body despite their careful movements. Once inside the aircraft, the noise and vibration created a cocoon of sensation that, combined with the stronger medications now flowing through his system, produced a strangely detached feeling. Jason found himself floating above the pain, aware of it but somehow separated from it. The helicopter lifted off, banking gently as it turned toward Kalispell. Through the side window, Jason caught a last glimpse of the magnificent landscape, where his ordinary workday had transformed into a life-altering event. The emerald green of the forests, the silver ribbon of streams, and the steel blue of mountain lakes spread out below, indifferent to the human drama that had just played out. The 20-minute flight passed in a semi-conscious haze for Jason. The flight medics worked continuously, monitoring his vital signs, adjusting medications, and changing blood-soaked bandages. They spoke to him periodically, ensuring he remained responsive, but their voices seemed to come from a great distance. Landing at Kalispell Regional Medical Center, Jason was transferred directly to the trauma unit. The bright lights and controlled chaos of the emergency department assaulted his senses after the relative quiet of the helicopter. Medical personnel swarmed around him, exchanging rapid-fire information as they cut away the remaining field dressings to assess his wounds. Multiple, deep lacerations to posterior torso, left shoulder, and anterior chest, reported the trauma surgeon, a woman with gray-streaked hair and steady hands. "Looks like significant tissue damage, but no obvious organ involvement. Let's get him to imaging, then straight to OR. I want antibiotics." Running wide open, bear attacks carry high infection risk. More medications flowed into Jason's IV, and he found himself drifting further from full awareness. The last thing he remembered before anesthesia claimed him was a nurse leaning close, her face kind but serious. "You're going to be all right, Mr. Parker. We're taking good care of you." When Jason next opened his eyes, the world had changed. He lay in a hospital bed, surrounded by the quiet beeping of monitors and the antiseptic smell of the recovery floor. Sunlight streamed through half-drawn blinds, creating patterns on the opposite wall. For a moment, disorientation clouded his thoughts. Where was he, and why did every inch of his body seem to ache? Then memory returned in a rush of visceral images. The massive grizzly among the huckleberry bushes, the failed attempt with bear spray, the crushing weight as the animal stood over him, the tearing sensation as claws ripped through flesh. He gasped involuntarily, the sudden movement sending fresh pain across his chest. "Easy there," came a voice from his right. A nurse stepped into view, adjusting something on one of the monitors. "You're safe now. You're at Kalispell Regional. Do you remember what happened?" Jason nodded weakly. "Bear," he managed, his throat dry and voice raspy. "That's right. You had an encounter with a grizzly yesterday morning. You've been through surgery to repair the damage. The doctor will be in shortly to explain everything." She offered him a small cup of water with a straw, helping him take small sips. "You're quite the celebrity around here. We don't get many bear attack survivors." Before Jason could respond, the door opened again, admitting a tall man in a white coat, stethoscope draped around his neck. "Mr. Parker, good to see you awake. I'm Dr. Levinson. I led the surgical team that worked on you yesterday." Dr. Levinson moved to the side of the bed, examining the monitors before turning his attention to Jason. "How's the pain level?" "Scale of 1 to 10. 7, maybe 8, Jason admitted, the throbbing across his torso intensifying as his awareness sharpened. The doctor nodded. "I'll have the nurse adjust your medication. You've got some significant injuries that are going to take time to heal." He pulled out a tablet, swiping through several screens. "We repaired lacerations to your back, chest, and left shoulder. The good news is that despite the depth of some wounds, no vital organs were damaged. The bear's claws missed your lungs by centimeters." He turned the tablet to show Jason several post-surgical photos of the wounds, now neatly sutured with rows of black stitches. "You have approximately 60 stitches across 3 major wound sites. There will be scarring, unfortunately, but our plastic surgeon did her best to minimize it." "When can I go home?" Jason asked, the question automatic, though he already suspected. The answer wouldn't be soon. "Not for several days at minimum," Dr. Levinson replied. "Bear attacks carry a high risk of infection. Their claws harbor numerous bacteria. We've started you on powerful antibiotics, but we need to monitor you closely for signs of infection or complications. Additionally, you lost a significant amount of blood. You received 2 units during surgery and your body needs time to recover from that shock. Jason nodded, the movement sending fresh pain through his neck and shoulder. Has anyone contacted my family? The Park Service notified your emergency contacts yesterday. Your parents arrived late last night and are in the waiting area. Would you like to see them? Yes, please. The doctor made a few more notes, promised to return later, and left. Minutes later, the door opened again to admit Clark and Margaret Parker, their faces drawn with worry that only partially eased upon seeing their son conscious. Jason, his mother whispered, moving quickly to his bedside and carefully taking his hand, the right one, uninjured. Her eyes were red-rimmed from crying, her normally tidy grey hair disheveled. Oh, sweetheart. His father stood at the foot of the bed, hands gripping the rail, his weathered face tight with emotion. At 62, Clark Parker still maintained the sturdy build of the construction foreman he had been before retirement, but now he seemed somehow diminished, the worry for his son weighing visibly on his shoulders. Hey, Mom, Dad, Jason managed, trying to summon a reassuring smile despite the pain. Sorry about this. Sorry? His father repeated, voice gruff with emotion. You get attacked by a grizzly bear and you're apologizing to us. That's my boy. The attempt at humor barely masked the fear and relief warring in his expression. Over. The next hour, Jason recounted the attack in halting detail, the memories still raw and visceral. His parents listened without interruption, his mother occasionally wiping tears, his father's jaw clenching at the most harrowing moments. The Rangers say you did everything textbook right, his father told him when he finished, making noise. On the trail, carrying bear spray, playing dead when it attacked, that's probably why you're still here. Small comfort when you look like you've been through a meat grinder, Jason replied, attempting humor despite the gravity of the situation. A knock at the door interrupted them. A man and woman entered, both wearing the distinctive uniform of the National Park Service. Jason recognized them immediately, Frank Wilcox, his supervisor, and Debbie Sanderson, the wildlife biologist who had warned him about bear activity that very morning. Parker, Frank said, approaching the bed with careful steps. Good to see you awake. You gave us one hell of a scare. How are you feeling? Debbie asked, her professional demeanor momentarily broken by genuine concern. Like I tangled with a grizzly and lost, Jason replied, the weak joke earning small, tension-relieving chuckles from everyone. Frank pulled up a chair. We need to talk about what happened if you're up to it. Standard procedure after any wildlife incident, especially one this serious. Jason nodded, understanding the requirement. The Park Service documented all human-wildlife encounters, using the information to better understand animal behavior and improve safety protocols. I know you told the rescue team some details, but we need a complete account, Frank continued. Take your time. Once again, Jason recounted the events, the hike up the trail, clearing the fallen tree, approaching the berry patch, the encounter with the bear, the failed attempt with the spray, and the attack itself. He described the bear in detail. Male, he thought, large but not enormous by grizzly standards, with a distinctive dish-shaped face and prominent shoulder hump. Debbie took notes throughout, occasionally asking clarifying questions about the bear's behavior before, during, and after the attack. From your description, it sounds like a defensive attack rather than predatory, she explained. The bear was surprised by your presence, reacted defensively, and then left once it perceived you were no longer a threat. That's supposed to make me feel better? Jason asked, a hint of bitterness creeping into his voice. It doesn't diminish what you went through, Debbie said gently, but it does inform our response. Predatory attacks where a bear actively hunts a human as prey are much rarer but require different management decisions. Frank cleared his throat. That brings us to the next topic. Wildlife. Management has been tracking the bear since yesterday. Based on your description and evidence at the scene, they believe they've identified it. A 9-year-old male that's been tagged in previous research efforts. We need to decide on the appropriate action, meaning whether to kill it, Jason's father interjected, his tone making clear his preference. Debbie and Frank exchanged glances. That's one option, Debbie acknowledged. Park policy gives us some discretion in cases of human-wildlife conflict, but there are several factors to consider. It was in a berry patch doing what bears do, Jason said quietly. I knew the risks when I took the job. That's a remarkably understanding attitude given the circumstances, Frank observed. Jason shifted in bed, wincing as the movement pulled at his stitches. Don't get me wrong, I'm not happy about being mauled, but it wasn't hunting me. I surprised it in its natural habitat. The current protocol for defensive attacks doesn't automatically trigger euthanasia, Debbie explained, especially in the backcountry where the bear was exhibiting normal feeding behavior. We'll continue monitoring the animal, potentially relocate it if necessary, but euthanasia would be considered a last resort in this scenario. Jason nodded, satisfied with this approach, though he noted his father's frown of disapproval. Clark. Parker had grown up in an era and culture where problem animals were simply eliminated, a perspective still common among many rural Montanans. But Jason's years working in wildlife management had given him a more nuanced view of the delicate balance between human safety and conservation. "We'll need you to give a formal statement once you're feeling better," Frank said, standing to leave, "but that can wait a few days. For now, focus on recovery. The Park Service will cover all your medical expenses and provide paid leave during your recovery." After they left, Jason's mother fussed with his pillows and blankets, her mothering instincts in full force despite her son being well into adulthood. His father stood by the window, looking out at the mountains visible in the distance. "You sure about not wanting them to put that bear down?" Clark asked finally, turning to face his son. "It could attack someone else, maybe someone who doesn't know what to do like you did." "The park will monitor it," Jason replied. "If it shows problematic behavior, they'll deal with it. But killing it just for being a bear doesn't seem right." His father shook his head but didn't press the issue. "Your mother and I are staying at a hotel nearby. We'll be here tomorrow morning, but you should rest now." After his parents left, exhaustion overtook Jason quickly. The pain medications pulled him toward sleep, but before unconsciousness claimed him, his mind returned to the moment of the attack. The bear's enormous presence, the power in its movement, the primal fear it had triggered. There had been no malice in those small dark eyes, he realized, just the instinctive response of a wild creature defending its feeding ground. That didn't make his injuries any less severe or his recovery any easier, but somehow, the thought brought a measure of peace as he drifted into sleep. The next few days established a rhythm of medical checks, pain management, and brief visits from family and colleagues. On the third day after surgery, Dr. Levinson brought in an infectious disease specialist who examined the wounds carefully, paying particular attention to the deeper gashes across Jason's back. "Bear claws harbor a remarkable variety of bacteria," the specialist explained, her gloved fingers gently probing the healing incisions. "We're seeing good response to the antibiotics, but we'll continue the course for at least 10 more days. The risk of infection remains significant." By the 5th day, Jason was able to walk short distances in the hospital corridor, each step a careful negotiation with pain. The chest wounds pulled with every breath, and his left shoulder, where the bear's teeth had bruised but thankfully not punctured deeply, had limited mobility. Physical therapists visited twice daily, guiding him through gentle exercises designed to maintain function without compromising healing. Visitors came and went, colleagues from the Park Service bringing news and well wishes, his sister flying in from Seattle for a 2-day visit, and even several local reporters seeking interviews about his experience. Jason declined the interview requests, not yet ready to recount his ordeal for public consumption. On the morning of the 7th day, Dr. Levinson arrived with discharge papers and a thick folder of home care instructions. "You're stable enough to continue recovery at home," he announced, "but you'll need significant help for at least the next 2 weeks. Someone needs to monitor your wounds, help with dressing changes, and ensure you're taking all medications as prescribed." Jason's mother, who had remained in Kalispell throughout his hospitalization, immediately volunteered. "He'll stay with us in Missoula. We've already prepared the guest room." The doctor nodded approvingly. "Perfect. I've arranged for follow-up care with specialists in Missoula, including wound care and physical therapy." He turned to Jason. "I can't emphasize enough how important it is to follow the recovery protocol exactly. These aren't ordinary cuts. They penetrated multiple tissue layers and required extensive internal and external suturing." "How long until I can go back to work?" Jason asked, already dreading the answer. "Light duty might be possible in 6 to 8 weeks depending on your healing progress," Dr. Levinson replied. "Regular trail maintenance with full physical exertion? Probably 3 to 4 months minimum, and that's assuming no complications." The timeline hit Jason harder than he expected. 3 to 4 months meant missing the remainder of the summer season and likely much of the fall. His job, his independence, his daily routine, all suddenly on hold because of a chance encounter that had lasted less than 2 minutes. The drive to his parents' home in Missoula took just over 2 hours. Jason sat uncomfortably in the back seat of his father's SUV, a pillow braced against his sutured back, watching the familiar Montana landscape roll by. The medication made him drowsy, and he drifted in and out of sleep, the motion of the vehicle occasionally sending sharp reminders of pain through his injured body. His parents' home, a modest ranch-style house where he had grown up, had been modified for his recovery. The guest room now contained a hospital bed on loan from a medical supply company, allowing him to sleep with his upper body elevated to reduce strain on his wounds. His mother had stocked the bathroom with dressing supplies, and a small table beside the bed held his medications, each in labeled containers with detailed instructions. The first week at his parents' house passed in a blur of pain management, wound care, and sleep. A visiting nurse came every other day to check his progress and change the more difficult dressings. Physical therapy began with excruciatingly simple movements that nonetheless left him exhausted and sore. Throughout this period, Jason found himself mentally returning to the attack repeatedly. Sometimes the memories came as nightmares, the bear's hot breath on his neck, the tearing sensation as claws ripped through his flesh, the certainty that death was imminent. Other times they emerged during quiet moments of the day, unbidden flashbacks that left him tense and sweating. "You might be experiencing some post-traumatic stress," suggested the psychologist, who visited 10 days after his discharge, sent by the Park Service's Employee Assistance Program. "That would be entirely normal considering what you went through." Jason had initially resisted the idea of psychological counseling, viewing it as unnecessary. He wasn't crazy or unstable, he'd simply had a bad experience that he needed to process. But as the psychologist, Dr. Eleanor Marsh, explained the typical responses to life-threatening events, he recognized many of his own symptoms. The flashbacks, anxiety, sleep disturbances, these are all common reactions, she told him. Your body and mind experienced extreme trauma. Just as your physical wounds need time and proper care to heal, so does the psychological impact. Over the following weeks, Jason met with Dr. Marsh regularly, gradually developing strategies to manage the anxiety and flashbacks. Simple breathing techniques helped interrupt the cascade of stress hormones when memories surfaced. Controlled exposure, talking about the event in measured doses, helped integrate the experience rather than allowing it to remain as fragmented, intrusive memories. Physical recovery progressed steadily but slowly. 3 weeks after the attack, the shorter sutures began to be removed, revealing angry red lines across his chest and back that the doctors assured him would fade somewhat with time. The deeper wounds required longer healing, their stitches remaining in place for nearly 5 weeks. 4 weeks in, Jason received a visit from Frank Wilcox and Debbie Sanderson, both making the drive from Glacier National Park to Missoula to check on him and provide an update on the situation. "The incident report has been finalized," Frank informed him, sitting in the living room with coffee provided by Margaret Parker. "Wildlife management tracked and observed the bear for 2 weeks after the attack. It showed no unusual aggression or habituation to humans, so the decision was made not to relocate or euthanize." Debbie added, "We've posted additional warnings in that area and temporarily restricted access to the section of trail where the attack occurred. It'll reopen late this month, with enhanced signage about bear activity." "Has there been much public reaction?" Jason asked. Knowing that bear attacks often generated significant media attention and controversy, Frank and Debbie exchanged glances. "Some," Frank acknowledged. "Local papers covered it, of course. There was a segment on Montana Public Radio about bear safety in the wake of the incident, a few of the usual voices calling for more aggressive bear management. But nothing like the circus it could have been," Debbie added. "You declining those initial interview requests helped keep the story from spreading too widely. Most coverage has used it as an opportunity to educate about proper behavior in bear country rather than sensationalizing." Jason nodded, relieved. He had worried that his experience might be used to justify more aggressive policies toward the park's bear population, potentially harming conservation efforts that maintained the delicate balance between public access and wildlife protection. "When do you think you'll be ready to come back?" Frank asked, the question casual but loaded with implications. "Doctor says maybe limited duty in another month," Jason replied. "Full trail work might not be until October, depending on how physical therapy goes." He hesitated, then voiced the question that had been troubling him. "Will I have trouble going back out there? Psychologically, I mean." Frank considered this thoughtfully. "Can't say for sure. I've known rangers who had close calls with wildlife or other backcountry dangers. Some never fully got comfortable again. Others found ways to manage it and returned to normal duties. "We'll work with you," Debbie assured him. "Maybe start with front country assignments, work in pairs for a while until you rebuild confidence. No one expects you to head right back to remote trails alone after something like this." Their visit provided both reassurance and a reality check. The job Jason loved still existed, waiting for his return, but the path back would require navigating both physical limitations and psychological hurdles. That night, lying in the adjustable bed with fresh bandages covering his healing wounds, he contemplated what returning to the trails would feel like. Would he flinch at every rustle in the underbrush? Would the sight of a bear, even from a safe distance, trigger panic? Would he second-guess his ability to handle emergency situations? The questions had no immediate answers. For now, his focus remained on the next physical therapy appointment, the next wound check, the next small step toward recovery. By week 6, Jason had progressed to walking longer distances. Daily outings around his parents' neighborhood gradually increased from 1 block to several. His stamina improved, though the extensive tissue damage across his torso still limited his range of motion and strength. The visiting physical therapist added resistance exercises to his routine, focusing on rebuilding the damaged muscle groups in his chest, back, and shoulder. "The scar tissue is forming well," noted Dr. Phillips, the wound care specialist in Missoula who had taken over his case. "But it will restrict movement if we don't keep working on flexibility." She demonstrated stretching techniques designed to maintain elasticity in the healing tissue, each movement causing discomfort that Jason had learned to work through. Week 8 brought a milestone: medical clearance to drive short distances and resume limited independent activities. Though still living at his parents' home, Jason began making solo trips to physical therapy appointments and brief shopping excursions, each small freedom celebrated as a victory over the limitations imposed by his injuries. His psychological recovery progressed alongside the physical healing. The nightmares became less frequent and the daytime flashbacks less intrusive. Dr. Marsh introduced more advanced techniques for managing trauma responses, including cognitive restructuring, to address the irrational beliefs that had developed. The sense that Wilderness was now fundamentally unsafe, that another attack was inevitable if he returned to work in the backcountry. The human brain is designed to overemphasize threat after a traumatic experience, she explained during one session. "It's trying to protect you by making you hypervigilant. But that same mechanism can prevent you from accurately assessing actual risk levels." They worked together to examine the reality of bear encounters statistically, how many thousands of backcountry hours park employees logged annually compared to the handful of serious incidents, how his own experience over 7 years included countless bear sightings without incident prior to the attack. Gradually, a more balanced perspective emerged, one that acknowledged the genuine dangers of backcountry work without catastrophizing them. At the 10-week mark, Jason received clearance for light-duty work. Frank arranged for him to start with administrative tasks at park headquarters, updating trail condition databases, processing maintenance requests, and helping coordinate the work schedules for the trail crews still active as summer transitioned to early fall. Returning to the park, even in this limited capacity, proved emotionally complicated. The familiar surroundings of park headquarters brought comfort, the camaraderie of colleagues, a welcome change after weeks of limited social contact. Yet proximity to the wilderness where he had nearly died also triggered anxiety that required conscious management using the techniques Dr. Marsh had taught him. Colleagues treated him with a mixture of concern, curiosity, and respect. Some asked detailed questions about the attack, while others avoided the subject entirely. A few shared their own stories of close calls in the backcountry. Lightning strikes narrowly missed, unexpected blizzards survived, falls that could have been fatal but resulted only in minor injuries. These exchanges normalized Jason's experience within the context of wilderness work, where calculated risk was an acknowledged part of the job. By week 12, the physical therapist cleared Jason for more strenuous activities in controlled environments. He began using the Park Service's employee gym, carefully rebuilding strength through progressive weight training. The scars across his chest and back, still vividly red against his skin, drew glances in the locker room but few direct comments. They had become part of his identity now, permanent reminders of a moment when wilderness had asserted its untamed reality. Frank began including Jason in planning meetings for the next season's trail maintenance projects. "We should get you back on the trails before winter sets in," he suggested during one such meeting. "Just day hikes at first, front country trails, always with a partner, see how it feels." The prospect brought mixed emotions. eagerness to reclaim that part of his life but apprehension about facing the environment where trauma had occurred. Jason found himself applying Dr. Marsh's cognitive techniques, acknowledging the anxiety without letting it dictate his decisions. "I'd like that," he told Frank, "sooner rather than later before I build it up too much in my mind." The opportunity came the following week. A routine inspection of the Trail of the Cedars, a wheelchair-accessible boardwalk trail near park headquarters, needed to be completed before winter maintenance planning. Frank proposed that Jason accompany him on this simple task. The morning of the hike dawned clear and cool, autumn colors painting the mountainsides in vibrant oranges and yellows. Jason prepared methodically, packing his day pack with the usual essentials, but paying special attention to his bear spray, checking and rechecking that it was full and functioning properly. He added a second canister as backup, a precaution he knew was probably unnecessary on such a heavily trafficked front-country trail, but that provided psychological comfort. "Ready for this?" Frank asked as they pulled into the trailhead parking area, already busy with visitors despite the advancing season. Jason took a deep breath, mentally scanning his body for tension and employing the relaxation techniques he had practiced. "As ready as I'll get without actually doing it." The Trail of the Cedars lived up to its name. A grove of ancient western red cedars created a cathedral-like atmosphere, their massive trunks rising straight and true, while their spreading canopies filtered the morning sunlight into dappled patterns on the forest floor. The boardwalk path wound among these giants, providing easy access for visitors of all mobility levels. Jason found himself hyper-aware of his surroundings as they walked, his senses seemingly sharpened. Every rustle in the underbrush registered instantly, his eyes tracking movement with automatic vigilance. Yet the populated nature of the trail, families with children, elderly couples, international tourists taking photos, created an environment so different from the remote Grinnell Glacier Trail that direct associations with the attack remained minimal. They completed the inspection methodically, noting areas where boardwalk planks showed signs of weathering or where handrails needed repair. The work itself was familiar and comforting, returning Jason to professional routines, established long before the attack. By the time they reached the halfway point of the loop trail, he realized his anxiety had diminished significantly, replaced by the familiar satisfaction of focused work in a beautiful setting. "Holding up, okay?" Frank asked during a brief rest, the question encompassing both physical stamina and psychological state. Jason nodded, surprised by how true his answer was. "Better than I expected. It helps that this trail is so different from where it happened. That's why we started here," Frank acknowledged. "Next time maybe something a little more secluded, but still well-traveled, step by step." They finished the inspection and returned to headquarters, the outing successful by any measure. Jason felt a quiet triumph, a small but significant victory in his journey back to full capacity. That evening, reporting the day's events to Dr. Marsh by phone, he allowed himself to acknowledge progress without diminishing the challenges still ahead. "The real test will be getting back into actual backcountry," he told her, "and seeing a bear again. That's going to be intense whenever it happens." "You'll prepare for those moments," she assured him, "and you may be surprised by your resilience when they arrive." Over the next 3 weeks, Jason gradually increased his field activities, accompanying different park staff on progressively more remote trail inspections and maintenance tasks. Each outing built confidence, while providing opportunities to practice the anxiety management techniques that were becoming second nature. The autumn weather cooperated, with clear skies and cooling temperatures, creating ideal conditions for outdoor work. 14 weeks after the attack, now back in his own apartment in West Glacier and working regular hours at park headquarters, Jason received an unexpected visit from Debbie Sanderson. The wildlife biologist appeared at his office door late one afternoon, her expression suggesting something beyond a casual check-in. "Got a minute?" she asked, leaning against the doorframe. "Sure," Jason replied, saving the trail condition database he had been updating. "What's up?" "Wildlife team is doing some routine telemetry tracking tomorrow in the Lake McDonald area," she said, entering and taking the seat across from his desk. "Checking locations on several collared bears before they den up for winter. Thought you might want to come along." The invitation caught Jason off guard. Radio tracking collared wildlife was normally outside his professional purview, and the EBUI timing seemed intentional rather than coincidental. "Is this some kind of exposure therapy?" he asked directly. Debbie smiled, not bothering to deny it. "Frank mentioned you've been making good progress getting back on trails, but that encountering a bear again remains a significant hurdle. This would be a controlled situation. We'll know exactly where the animals are, maintain safe distances, and you'll be with experienced wildlife personnel. Jason considered the proposal, aware of both the opportunity and the challenge it presented. Deliberate exposure to a fear trigger under controlled conditions aligned with Dr. Marsh's therapeutic approach, yet the prospect of intentionally seeking out bears even at a distance sent a flutter of anxiety through his chest. Would we actually see them or just track radio signals? He asked. Probably both, Debbie replied honestly. This time of year, they're actively feeding to pack on calories before hibernation. We typically get visual confirmation when possible, using spotting scopes from safe distances. Jason thought about it overnight, discussing the opportunity with Dr. Marsh by phone. She supported the idea with certain caveats. Be prepared for stronger emotional responses than you might expect, she cautioned. Have your coping strategies ready, and remember that avoidance reinforces fear, while controlled exposure gradually diminishes it. The next morning, Jason met Debbie and 2 other wildlife technicians at park headquarters before sunrise. They loaded tracking equipment into a Park Service SUV and headed toward the Lake McDonald area, where several bears fitted with radio collars during research operations were known to frequent the berry-rich slopes. As they drove, Debbie explained the day's objectives. We're primarily tracking a 6-year-old female that was collared last spring and her 2 cubs plus 2 solitary males in adjacent territories. The data helps us understand pre-denning movement patterns and habitat utilization. They parked at a service road access point and hiked approximately 1 mile to a ridgeline, overlooking a series of avalanche chutes, open areas where snowslides had cleared the forest, creating ideal habitat for the berry bushes that attracted bears in fall. Setting up their equipment, one of the technicians began systematically scanning frequencies, the receiver emitting different patterns of beeps as it detected the unique signals from each collar. Got the female, he announced after several minutes. Signals strong. She's likely in the second chute to the north. He handed Debbie a set of coordinates, which she plotted on a topographic map. About 600 yards from our position, she noted, then glanced at Jason. Want to try for visual confirmation? Jason felt his heart rate increase but nodded. That's why I'm here. Matt Terrain repositioned along the ridge to gain a better vantage point, setting up spotting scopes on tripods. The wildlife technicians scanned methodically, while Jason used binoculars, searching the open slope of the avalanche chute where yellowing vegetation provided less camouflage than summer's greenery would have. Movement at the tree line, 2 o'clock, one of the technicians announced quietly. All scopes turned in that direction. Through his binoculars, Jason caught the movement, a dark shape emerging from the forest edge into the avalanche chute. Even at this distance, the distinctive shoulder hump identified it unmistakably as a grizzly. A moment later, 2 smaller shapes followed, cubs now nearly as large as yearlings but still dependent on their mother. Jason's physical reaction was immediate and strong. His heart hammered against his ribs, palms suddenly slick with sweat, breath coming in shallow gasps. The bear family, completely unaware of the human observers hundreds of yards away, began systematically working through a patch of berries, the mother occasionally raising her head to scan the surroundings while the cubs focused on feeding. "You okay?" Debbie asked softly, noting Jason's reaction. He nodded, unable to speak immediately as he implemented the breathing techniques Dr. Marsh had taught him. 4-count inhale, 7-count hold, 8-count exhale. Gradually, his physiological response moderated, though the heightened awareness remained. "Different than I expected," he managed after several minutes of controlled breathing, still watching the bears through binoculars. Seeing them like this, just doing bear things, so different from... He didn't finish the sentence, but Debbie nodded understanding. "That's partly the point," she said, contextualizing the experience. Bears spent 99.9% of their time just being bears, eating, sleeping, raising cubs. What happened to you was exceptionally rare, even though it was profoundly impactful. They observed the bear family for nearly 40 minutes before the animals moved back into the forest. During that time, Jason's anxiety response diminished significantly, allowing him to appreciate the experience professionally rather than remaining locked in a trauma response. The wildlife technicians collected additional data, estimated weights, condition observations, feeding behaviors, while Debbie explained the significance of their observations. "She's in excellent condition," she noted. "Cubs are good size, for their age. They should all den with good fat reserves, which means high likelihood of winter survival. After the bears disappeared from view, the team tracked signals from the 2 solitary males, obtaining visual confirmation of one massive old boar feeding alone in a distant drainage. This second sighting produced less anxiety for Jason, the initial exposure having partially desensitized his response. On the hike back to the vehicle, he found himself processing the experience with growing clarity. "It's strange," he told Debbie. "Intellectually, I never blamed the bear that attacked me. I always understood it was just doing what bears do when surprised. But emotionally, bears as a whole became threat objects. Seeing them today, just living their bear lives at a distance, reconnected the intellectual understanding with the emotional experience." "That sounds like progress," she observed. "It is," Jason agreed. "Not complete, but meaningful." That evening, reviewing the day's events in his journal as Dr. Marsh had encouraged him to do throughout his recovery, Jason acknowledged both the challenge and the achievement. The experience had reinforced what he already knew logically, that his attack had been an anomalous event rather than the norm, that bears could be observed safely with proper precautions, that his professional relationship with wildlife could be restored despite the trauma he had experienced. The following week brought another milestone in Jason's recovery. Frank scheduled him for his first proper trail maintenance outing, a day trip to clear deadfall from a front country trail, working alongside 2 other crew members. The assignment involved actual physical labor in the field, testing both his recovered strength and his comfort level in the wilderness. The morning of the assignment, Jason prepared his equipment with practiced efficiency, the routine both familiar and strange after months away from regular fieldwork. His backpack contained the standard tools, folding saw, pruning shears, work gloves, alongside the safety equipment that had taken on new significance: bear spray in a holster positioned for immediate access, a backup canister in his pack, and the park service radio that had likely saved his life during the attack. Meeting his colleagues at the maintenance yard, Jason found himself the recipient of understated but genuine welcome back gestures, firm handshakes, pats on the shoulder, quiet acknowledgements of the significance of his return to field duties. The team loaded tools into a truck and headed to the trailhead, conversation flowing naturally around work topics, upcoming projects, and the early forecasts for winter snowpack. The trail they had been assigned required basic maintenance, clearing several trees that had fallen during recent windstorms, trimming encroaching vegetation, and assessing drainage issues that might require more extensive work before winter. It was precisely the kind of work Jason had been doing the day of the attack, but the circumstances differed significantly. A well-traveled path rather than backcountry, multiple team members rather than solo work, and a heightened awareness that everyone shared. As they hiked to the first work site, Jason found his senses automatically scanning the environment, a behavior that had become second nature since the attack. Every sound registered, every movement in his peripheral vision noted and categorized. Yet, unlike the hypervigilance of earlier recovery stages, this awareness now felt more controlled, less driven by anxiety and more by practical caution. The physical work proved therapeutic in its own way. The rhythmic action of sawing through fallen timber, the problem-solving of determining the most efficient cutting sequence, the satisfaction of clearing obstacles, all reconnected Jason to the core elements of his job that had drawn him to it initially. His body responded well, the healed wounds causing only occasional twinges when certain movements stretched the scar tissue. "Good to have you back at it," commented Rachel, one of his colleagues, during a water break. "Crew hasn't been the same without you." "Good to be back," Jason replied, surprised by how genuinely he meant it. The forest around them, the same ecosystem where he had nearly died, now felt less like a threat environment and more like the workplace he had always valued, albeit one that demanded appropriate respect. They completed the assigned work by mid-afternoon, returning to headquarters with the satisfaction of tangible accomplishment. Frank, reviewing their report, nodded approval. "Ready for something more challenging next week?" he asked Jason. "I think so," Jason replied. "Maybe not overnight backcountry yet, but I'm getting there." The progression continued methodically over the following weeks. Each assignment took Jason slightly further from headquarters, involved slightly more complex work, and rebuilt both his physical capabilities and his comfort in the environment. By the time snow began accumulating at higher elevations, signaling the approaching transition to winter operations, he had participated in trail maintenance throughout much of the park's accessible front country. Backcountry work, the multi-day, Trips into remote areas that had been his specialty remained a goal for the following season. Winter would provide a natural pause in that progression, with trail crews shifting to snow removal, facility maintenance, and planning for the following year's projects. During this period of professional reintegration, Jason maintained regular contact with Dr. Marsh, their sessions now bi-weekly rather than weekly. "How are you feeling about the progress so far?" she asked during a late November appointment. "Mostly positive," Jason replied, considering the question carefully. "The daily anxiety is much reduced. I'm comfortable enough on front country trails that it doesn't dominate my thinking. Being with other crew members helps significantly. And the prospect of returning to backcountry work eventually? Still intimidating," he admitted, "especially the idea of working alone in remote areas again. That might take longer." Dr. Marsh nodded. "That's a rational response, not an anxious one. Solo backcountry work after a near-fatal attack would reasonably involve additional precautions and considerations." This distinction between pathological anxiety and reasonable caution had become central to Jason's recovery process. The attack had forever altered his relationship with wilderness risk, but the goal had never been to eliminate appropriate caution, only to prevent trauma responses from overriding rational assessment. As winter settled over Glacier National Park, transforming the landscape with deep snow and ice, Jason's work shifted accordingly. Trail maintenance gave way to facility repairs, equipment overhaul, and administrative tasks. The change in routine provided a natural break in his graduated re-exposure to backcountry environments, a time to consolidate the progress made and prepare for the challenges of the coming spring. During this period, he received an unexpected communication, an invitation to speak at a regional wilderness safety conference in Bozeman. The organizers had learned of his experience and recovery process, suggesting that his perspective would be valuable for other backcountry professionals. Jason's initial reaction was hesitation. Public speaking had never been his strength, and the prospect of recounting his trauma for an audience seemed potentially distressing. He discussed the invitation with both Frank and Dr. Marsh before making a decision. "It could be therapeutic," Dr. Marsh suggested. "Forming the experience into a coherent narrative that helps others can facilitate integration and meaning-making." Frank was more pragmatic. "You've got insights now that could genuinely help other field workers, and selfishly, it's good PR for the park's safety protocols. You did everything right and survived to tell about it." After consideration, Jason accepted the invitation with certain parameters. He would focus on the safety procedures that had helped him survive and the EEE recovery process rather than dramatizing the attack itself. The conference organizers readily agreed, scheduling him for a 45-minute presentation in February. Preparing for the presentation provided an unexpected benefit: the need to organize his experience chronologically and analyze it objectively created emotional distance that further reduced the trauma's grip. Working with the park's safety coordinator, Jason developed materials that emphasized practical takeaways: the importance of making noise in bear country, proper bear spray deployment techniques, and the value of established check-in protocols for backcountry workers. When February arrived, Jason traveled to Bozeman with a carefully prepared presentation and lingering nervousness. The conference attendees included Forest Service personnel, park rangers, wilderness guides, and outdoor education professionals, people who shared his professional context and understood the inherent risks of backcountry work. Standing at the podium looking out at the attentive faces, Jason began with a simple statement. "Last August, I had an encounter that many in our profession prepare for but hope never to experience. I was attacked by a grizzly bear while performing routine trail maintenance in Glacier National Park. The next 45 minutes aren't about sensationalizing that event, but about what helped me survive it and what I've learned during recovery." The presentation flowed more easily than he had anticipated. He described the protocols he had followed before, during, and after the attack: making noise on the trail, carrying accessible bear spray, proper positioning when the spray failed to fully deter the charge, radio check-ins that ensured prompt emergency response. He outlined the medical interventions, physical therapy protocols, and psychological approaches that had facilitated his recovery. "The physical scars are obvious," he noted, gesturing to his chest where, beneath his shirt, the vivid red lines remained prominent. "The psychological recovery is less visible, but equally important. Trauma changes your relationship with risk, but it doesn't have to end your career in the backcountry." The question and answer session that followed revealed how deeply his experience resonated with the audience. Many had their own stories of close calls, if not with bears, then with other wilderness hazards, lightning, avalanches, flash floods, or simply the isolation that could turn a minor injury into a life-threatening situation. A Forest Service wilderness ranger from Wyoming asked the question that seemed most pressing to many. Has this changed how you feel about grizzly conservation? A lot of people might come out of an experience like yours with a different perspective on having these predators on the landscape. Jason considered the question carefully before responding. If anything, I have more respect for them now, both for their power and for their essential wildness. What happened to me wasn't malicious, it was a wild animal responding to a perceived threat in its feeding area. I still believe there's room on the landscape for both humans and grizzlies, with appropriate education and precautions. After the conference, several attendees approached him individually, sharing their own experiences or asking follow-up questions about specific aspects of his recovery. The connections formed during these conversations reinforced something Dr. Marsh had emphasized throughout his treatment, that trauma need not remain an isolating experience, that sharing it appropriately could create community and meaning. Returning to Glacier National Park after the conference, Jason found himself entering the final phase of winter operations. March brought the first planning meetings for spring trail clearance as the maintenance crews prepared for the massive task of clearing winter deadfall and snow damage from the park's extensive trail system. Frank included Jason in all these discussions, treating him as an integral part of the coming season's operations. We'll need to discuss your comfort level with different assignments, Frank noted during one planning session. I'm thinking paired assignments for the first month at least, even on trails where we might normally send someone solo. Jason nodded, appreciating both the accommodation and the matter-of-fact way it was presented, not as special treatment, but as a practical consideration. That makes sense. I'd like to work towards solo backcountry assignments eventually, but a graduated approach seems wise. As April arrived, bringing the first significant spring melt to the lower elevations of the park, Jason found himself looking forward to the coming season with cautious optimism. The winter's indoor work had provided necessary recovery time, but the call of the trails grew stronger as weather improved. His physical condition had returned to nearly pre-attack levels, with only some limitation in left shoulder mobility and occasional tightness across the scarred areas during extensive exertion. The psychological recovery, while less visibly complete, had progressed substantially. Nightmares now came only occasionally rather than nightly. The hypervigilance that had characterized his early recovery had moderated into appropriate situational awareness. Most significantly, he had reached a point where thoughts of returning to backcountry work generated more anticipation than anxiety. In late April, exactly 8 months after the attack, Jason participated in the season's first major trail clearing operation. A team of 6 maintenance workers, including himself, tackled a popular trail near Lake McDonald, removing dozens of trees that had fallen during winter storms. The work was physically demanding, but deeply satisfying, the tangible results of their labor immediately visible as hikers began using the newly cleared path. Throughout the day, Jason maintained awareness of his surroundings without slipping into anxiety. When the team encountered fresh bear scat on the trail, evidence of a black bear, smaller and less symmetrical than grizzly droppings, he noted it professionally, ensuring everyone was alert but not allowing the sign to trigger disproportionate concern. That evening, returning to his apartment after a shower and meal, Jason stood before the bathroom mirror, examining the scars that now mapped his torso. The angry red lines had faded somewhat to purplish pink, still vividly visible against his skin but no longer looking raw. The deepest furrow across his chest would likely remain prominent for life, a permanent reminder of how quickly wilderness could assert its ultimate authority. He traced the longest scar with his fingertip, feeling the slightly raised tissue where the bear's claws had torn through skin, fat, and muscle. In time, these marks would fade further, becoming silver-white lines against his skin, but they would never disappear completely. They had become part of his story now, as integral to his identity as his choice of profession or place to live. The next morning, checking the assignment board at headquarters, Jason found himself listed for a 2-person maintenance run to Avalanche Lake Trail, his first backcountry assignment since the attack, albeit a relatively accessible one with a partner. Frank caught his eye across the room, raising an eyebrow in silent question. Jason nodded affirmation. He was ready for this step. His assigned partner was Miguel Hernandez, an experienced trail worker who had been with the Park Service nearly as long as Jason. As they loaded equipment into the truck, Miguel addressed the situation directly. "First time back in the deep woods, yeah? How are you feeling about it?" "Ready to find out," Jason replied honestly. "Appreciate having a solid partner for it." The drive to the trailhead passed with comfortable shop talk, discussion of trail conditions, tool preferences, the early season wildlife activity already noted by various park staff. Upon arrival, they methodically prepared their packs and tools, each performing their personal safety checks. Water, first aid kits, communications equipment. Jason positioned his bear spray holster on his belt, ensuring the canister could be drawn with a single clean motion, then added the backup spray to an accessible pocket in his pack. The trail to Avalanche Lake climbed steadily through dense forest alongside Avalanche Creek, the sound of rushing water a constant companion. Spring runoff had swollen the stream, creating cascades, and whitewater displays where the channel narrowed. The path showed typical winter damage, fallen branches, erosion from heavy snowmelt, and occasional deadfall requiring removal. They worked efficiently, leapfrogging each other as they addressed different maintenance issues. Jason felt the familiar rhythm of the work returning, the physical motions automatic after years of practice. The forest around them buzzed with spring activity, birds calling, squirrels chattering, the occasional rustle of larger animals moving through underbrush in the distance. Approximately 2 miles in, as the trail approached Avalanche Lake itself, Miguel paused suddenly, raising his hand in the universal signal for stop. Jason froze instantly, following his partner's gaze to the trail ahead. Approximately 50 yards away, a black bear moved across the path, apparently unaware of the human presence. The animal, medium-sized and with the characteristic straight facial profile of Ursus americanus, disappeared into the undergrowth on the opposite side without incident. Jason realized he had instinctively placed his hand on the bear spray holster, ready to deploy if necessary, but without the flooding panic that might have overwhelmed him months earlier. His heart rate had increased, certainly, but his breathing remained controlled, his mind clear and focused rather than clouded by fear. "You good?" Miguel asked quietly after the bear had gone. Jason nodded, realizing with mild surprise that he was in fact good. The sighting had triggered appropriate alertness without tipping into anxiety or flashbacks. Yeah, just a black bear doing its thing. They continued their work, maintaining slightly higher noise levels as a precaution, but otherwise returning to normal operations. By early afternoon, they had reached Avalanche Lake, a stunning alpine body of water surrounded by steep mountain walls still capped with snow. They took a brief lunch break at the shoreline, appreciating the view that made this one of the park's most popular day hikes. "Not a bad office," Miguel commented, gesturing toward the panorama before them. "Worth the occasional occupational hazard," Jason replied, surprising himself with the ease of the statement. The return hike felt like a victory lap of sorts. Jason had completed his first backcountry assignment since the attack without incident, managing both the physical demands and the psychological components successfully. As they loaded equipment back into the truck at day's end, he experienced a sense of reclamation of his profession, his comfort in wilderness, and a part of his identity that had been temporarily disrupted by trauma. Over the following weeks, Jason's assignments gradually increased in complexity and remoteness. Always working with a partner, he ventured deeper into the backcountry, staying overnight at remote cabins during multi-day maintenance runs and encountering wildlife, including distant grizzlies viewed through binoculars, without experiencing debilitating anxiety. By mid-June, as the summer tourist season reached full swing, he had resumed most of his previous duties, with modifications that reflected both practical safety considerations and his evolving relationship with risk. Solo backcountry assignments remained off the table for now, a limitation he accepted as reasonable rather than restrictive. 1 year after the attack in early August, Jason made a personal pilgrimage that felt necessary for full closure. With Frank's approval, and Debbie accompanying as both colleague and wildlife expert, he hiked the Grinnell Glacier Trail to the location where the attack had occurred. The berry patches that had attracted the bear the previous year were again heavy with fruit, the cycle of seasons continuing regardless of human drama. Standing at the precise bend in the trail where he had first encountered the grizzly, Jason experienced a complex mix of emotions, residual anxiety certainly, but also appreciation for the wild landscape that had nearly claimed his life, yet remained central to his chosen existence. The mountains rose indifferently around him, neither malevolent nor benevolent, simply present in their massive reality. "How does it feel to be back here?" Debbie asked, maintaining a respectful distance as Jason processed the moment. Like closing a circle, he replied after consideration, not erasing what happened but containing it somehow, making it part of the story rather than the end of it. They continued to the glacier viewpoint, the destination he had never reached that day before returning down the trail. As they hiked, Jason reflected on the journey of the past year. The physical scars would remain with him for life, visible reminders of his vulnerability in the face of wild nature. The psychological impact, too, had permanently altered his perspective, instilling a deeper respect for the power of wilderness and the thin margins that sometimes separated safety from catastrophe. Yet he had reclaimed his place in this landscape, not through conquering fear or denying risk, but by acknowledging both while refusing to be defined solely by a single traumatic event. The mountains, forests, and wildlife of Glacier National Park remained his chosen context, the setting where he found meaning and purpose despite, or perhaps now partially because of, their inherent dangers. That evening, back at park headquarters after the hike, Frank handed Jason an assignment sheet for the following week. "Thought you might want to see this," he said casually. Jason scanned the document, his eye catching on a particular entry. Parker, Solo Day Maintenance, Apgar Lookout Trail. He looked up at Frank questioningly. "If you're ready," Frank added. "No pressure. We can pair you up instead if you prefer." The Apgar Lookout Trail was relatively short, well-traveled, and in an area primarily inhabited by black bears rather than grizzlies. It represented a carefully calculated next step, the first solo backcountry assignment since the attack, but with parameters that acknowledged the ongoing recovery process. Jason considered the offer, mentally assessing his readiness with the honest self-evaluation that had become central to his recovery. The prospect generated some anxiety as expected, but not the overwhelming dread that would have indicated he wasn't prepared. "I'll take it," he decided. "Feels like the right time." The night before the solo assignment, Jason reviewed his equipment with characteristic thoroughness, checking his tools, communications gear, and safety equipment. He added a few personal modifications that hadn't been part of his pre-attack. Routine: a more comprehensive first aid kit, a satellite communication device as backup to the park radio, and a small canister of bear spray attached to his pack strap where it could be accessed even if he lost the primary canister on his belt. He slept surprisingly well, without the anticipatory nightmares he might have expected. The morning dawned clear and cool, promising perfect hiking conditions. As he loaded his gear into a park service truck, several colleagues offered casual acknowledgements, nods, brief words of encouragement, nothing dramatic but clear recognition of the milestone this day represented. The drive to the trailhead took just under 30 minutes, the familiar route allowing his thoughts to settle into the calm focus that had characterized his best workdays before the attack. Arriving at the parking area, he methodically prepared for the hike, going through safety checks that had become second nature over years of backcountry work, but now carried deeper significance. The Apgar Lookout Trail climbed steadily through lodgepole pine forest before opening to views of Lake McDonald and the surrounding mountains. Jason maintained a comfortable pace, stopping occasionally to address minor maintenance issues, clearing drainage ditches, removing fallen branches from the path, marking larger problems for future crew work. He made noise at appropriate intervals, particularly when approaching blind corners or dense vegetation, the caution professional rather than fearful. Approximately halfway up the trail, he encountered a young couple hiking down from the lookout. They exchanged brief greetings, the hikers unaware of the significance this ordinary interaction held for Jason, his first encounter with park visitors while working solo since the attack. As he continued climbing, the trail emerged from forest into areas affected by previous wildfires, the open landscape offering expansive views and high visibility. Jason found himself appreciating this exposure rather than missing the cover of trees, the ability to see long distances in all directions, providing both practical safety and psychological comfort. Near the summit, where the lookout tower perched, on an exposed ridge, he paused to radio his position to headquarters, standard procedure for backcountry workers, but performed with particular awareness of its importance. "Parker to base, I'm at Apgar Lookout. Trail maintenance complete to this point. Beginning descent in approximately 30 minutes. Over. Copy that, Parker," came the response. "Weather still looking good in your area. Check in when you reach." The trailhead. Out. Jason spent time at the lookout conducting minor repairs to the structure's exterior, tightening loose boards, replacing damaged weather stripping around windows, tasks that had been on the maintenance list for weeks. The work provided both practical purpose and a chance to experience being alone in the backcountry again, reacclimating to the solitude that had once been a familiar part of his professional life. The descent went smoothly, the trails moderate, grade and good condition allowing for efficient progress. About a mile from the trailhead, movement in the vegetation beside the path caught his attention. He stopped immediately, hand moving to his bear spray in a now automatic response, senses heightening as he scanned for the source. A black bear emerged partway onto the trail approximately 40 yards ahead, focused on something in the underbrush rather than on the human presence. It was a young adult, perhaps 3 years old, with the glossy coat and muscular build of an animal in excellent condition. The bear remained unaware of Jason for several seconds before raising its head, nostrils flaring as it caught his scent. Time seemed to slow as Jason assessed the situation with the clarity that came from both training and hard-won experience. The bear showed no signs of aggression or stress, no lowered head, no flattened ears, none of the warning signals he had learned to recognize through both study and direct encounter. It appeared merely curious, perhaps mildly concerned by the human scent, but not threatened. "Hey bear," Jason called in a calm, firm voice, using the standard alert that backcountry workers employed to avoid surprising wildlife. "Just passing through." The bear considered him for a moment, head slightly tilted in apparent assessment, before huffing once and turning to amble back into the forest. The entire encounter lasted less than 30 seconds, ending exactly as the vast majority of human bear interactions did, with the animal choosing avoidance over confrontation. Jason remained still until the bear had disappeared completely, then waited an additional few minutes before continuing down the trail, making slightly more noise than before to ensure the animal remained aware of his presence and could maintain comfortable distance. His heart rate had increased during the encounter, but had already begun returning to normal, the response proportional rather than panic-driven. When he reached the trailhead and radioed in his safe return, he realized that the bear encounter had unfolded almost perfectly, a controlled experience that allowed him to validate his recovery in the most practical way possible. He had seen a bear while alone in the backcountry, responded appropriately, and continued his work without the encounter dominating his psychological state. Back at headquarters, completing his daily report, Jason briefly mentioned the black bear sighting in the appropriate section, noting the animal's condition, approximate age and behavior, standard information collected by the park's wildlife management team. Frank, reviewing the report, raised an eyebrow. "Eventful first solo," he commented. "You handled it okay." Jason nodded. "Better than okay, actually. It was normal, the way it should be." "That's what we've been working toward," Frank replied, with satisfaction. "Getting back to normal, or whatever the new normal looks like after something like that happens." The new normal, Jason reflected as he drove home that evening, didn't mean pretending the attack had never occurred, or that it hadn't changed him. The physical scars remained, as did certain psychological adjustments. He would likely never approach a berry patch on a blind corner with the casual confidence he once had. He would always carry backup communications and first aid equipment that some might consider excessive. The sound of heavy animal movement in nearby underbrush would always trigger a moment of heightened alertness that went beyond standard caution. But these changes existed alongside the restored core of his professional identity and his relationship with wilderness. The attack had become part of his story rather than its conclusion, a significant chapter certainly, but not the final one. The grizzly that had nearly killed him had returned to the landscape of memory, where it remained powerful but no longer overwhelming, a reminder of both vulnerability and resilience. As summer transitioned to fall, Jason continued expanding his role, gradually taking on more remote assignments while maintaining the modified safety protocols that had become his personal standard. His colleagues, after an initial period of heightened concern, had largely returned to treating him as they had before, a competent, experienced member of the trail maintenance team rather than a trauma survivor requiring special handling. Visitors to the park, passing him on trails or encountering him during maintenance work, saw only a Park Service employee going about his duties. They had no way of knowing that the friendly trail worker, who answered their questions about hiking distances or wildlife sightings, had just over a year earlier lain bleeding and fighting for survival after a grizzly attack less than 10 miles from where they now stood. The story lived primarily within Jason and the close colleagues who had supported his recovery, not as public drama but as personal experience. Occasionally, someone would notice the scars, visible at his neck when he removed his uniform shirt during strenuous work or glimpsed when changing clothes at the employee gym. New seasonal workers sometimes asked about them directly, while more experienced colleagues already knew the story. Jason developed a matter-of-fact response that acknowledged the reality without sensationalizing it. Grisly encounter while doing trail work. Learned some important lessons about bear safety that day. In October, as the aspens turned golden and the first snows dusted the highest peaks, Jason received an email from the conference organizers in Bozeman, inviting him to return as a speaker at the following year's Wilderness Safety Gathering. The proposed topic, long-term recovery and return to fieldwork after wildlife injury, suggested interest in the next phase of his journey rather than just the dramatic incident itself. He accepted the invitation, recognizing the potential value in sharing not just survival techniques, but the longer, less dramatic process of physical and psychological recovery. The email prompted reflection on how far he had come in the 14 months since the attack, from hospital bed to full field duties, from trauma patient to functioning professional, with a deeper perspective on wilderness risk. The year's first significant snowfall arrived in early November, effectively ending the maintenance season for most backcountry trails. The park transitioned to winter operations, with trail crews shifting focus to snow removal from roads and facilities, equipment, maintenance and planning for the following year's projects. For Jason, this natural cycle provided a sense of completion. He had successfully navigated a full season's return to backcountry work, reclaiming his professional identity while integrating the lasting impacts of his experience. During the winter months, he occasionally shared his story with new Park Service trainees during safety seminars, emphasizing practical techniques rather than dramatic details. These sessions reinforced his own processing of the event, transforming it from raw experience to useful knowledge that might help others navigate the inherent risks of wilderness work. The grizzly that had attacked him, meanwhile, had continued its own existence in the park's extensive backcountry. According to Debbie's updates from the wildlife management team, the bear had been spotted several times during the summer and fall, always in natural feeding areas well removed from developed facilities. It showed no unusual interest in humans or human food sources, behaving as a wild grizzly should in its native habitat. The animal had likely already entered hibernation for the winter, curled in a remote den, sleeping away the cold months until spring would bring it out to begin the cycle again. Jason found a certain peace in this knowledge that both he and the bear continued their separate but interconnected existences in the shared landscape of Glacier National Park. The animal had not been destroyed for following its instincts in a chance encounter, and he had not been driven from his chosen profession by fear of such encounters. The system worked as it should, allowing for coexistence despite the occasional inevitable conflicts that arose when humans entered wilderness areas. On a cold December evening, Jason stood at his apartment window, looking out at the snow-covered peaks visible in the distance. The mountains appeared different in winter, more remote, more formidable, their white slopes gleaming in the last light of day. Yet they remained essentially the same landscape he had chosen as both workplace and home, the setting for his professional life and personal identity. The scars across his chest and back pulled slightly as he raised his coffee mug, a familiar sensation that had become part of his daily experience. They would always remain with him, these physical reminders of a moment when wilderness had asserted its raw power against human presence, but they had become integrated into his understanding of himself and his place in the natural world, markers of an experience that had nearly ended his story, but instead had deepened it. Come spring, he would return to the trails as they emerged from winter's grip, participating in the annual cycle of maintenance that kept the park accessible to visitors while preserving its essential wildness. He would work with appropriate caution, but without debilitating fear, carrying the knowledge of both vulnerability and resilience that his experience had imparted. And somewhere in the vast backcountry, the grizzly would emerge from hibernation to begin its own annual cycle, the two of them sharing the landscape with a respectful distance that acknowledged their fundamental differences while allowing both to exist within the same magnificent wilderness. The gentle swaying of the hammock had lulled Nicole Foster into a deep sleep beneath the towering pines of Idaho's Sawtooth Mountains. The 32-year-old software developer from Boise had been looking forward to this solo weekend camping trip for months, a much-needed respite from the glowing screens and endless meetings that dominated her workdays. The August air was cool against her face, carrying the scent of pine and distant wildflowers as she drifted between dreams, cocooned in her lightweight sleeping bag. Nicole had chosen a secluded spot in the Stanley Lake area, about a quarter-mile from the nearest group of campers, close enough for safety, far enough for the solitude she craved. She'd followed all the proper protocols. Her food was secured in a bear canister, placed well away from her campsite, her toiletries sealed in odor-proof bags, and her clothing free of any food residue. As a seasoned backpacker with 5 years of experience exploring the wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest, Nicole prided herself on her meticulous preparation and respect for wildlife safety guidelines. What she couldn't account for was the behavior of others. The Johansson family, Carl, Melissa, and their teenage children Tyler and Emma, had arrived at their campsite just before sunset. Weekend warriors from Twin Falls, they were enthusiastic, but inexperienced, having only recently taken up camping as a family activity. Carl had forgotten to properly seal their cooler after preparing hot dogs for dinner, and a bag of marshmallows lay partially open near their fire pit. Tyler had brought a candy bar into his tent, the wrapper now discarded carelessly just outside. These seemingly minor oversights created an aromatic beacon that would draw unwanted attention in the pre-dawn hours. The black bear, a 3-year-old male weighing approximately 200 pounds, had been roaming these mountains his entire life. Recently pushed from his original territory by larger males during breeding season, he'd been exploring the boundaries of his new range, learning the contours of the land and the patterns of potential food sources. With autumn approaching, his biological imperative to consume enough calories for winter hibernation was growing stronger each day. Natural food sources were available, berries, nuts, insects, but the distinctive scent of processed human food promised a much higher caloric reward for far less effort. The bear had discovered the benefits of human proximity earlier that summer, finding unsecured garbage at trailheads and occasionally bold hikers who would retreat, leaving behind their snacks when they spotted him. He wasn't aggressive by nature, but he had learned that humans typically yielded space and food when he approached. This pattern reinforced itself over time, diminishing his natural wariness. Rangers in the area had noted increased bear activity, but hadn't yet identified this particular animal as habituated to human food. Nicole's dreams shifted from the pleasant to the anxious, as her subconscious registered something amiss in her surroundings. The rhythmic swaying of her hammock had changed, becoming more erratic. There was a snuffling sound, heavy breathing that didn't match the natural ambience of the forest. Her eyes snapped open in the darkness, the sensation of wrongness fully formed before her conscious mind could process what was happening. The bear stood on its hind legs, front paws gripping the edge of her hammock, nose investigating the unfamiliar shape suspended between the trees. Nicole's body froze while her mind raced, cycling through everything she knew about bear encounters. Make yourself big, make noise, don't run, fight back against black bears, play dead with grizzlies. The fragmented advice collided uselessly as panic surged through her system. The bear dropped back to all fours, pawing at the hammock with increasing interest. Nicole's breath caught in her throat as she realized her predicament, suspended 3 feet off the ground, restricted by her sleeping bag, with no easy way to extract herself or appear intimidating. She opened her mouth to shout, to follow the first rule of bear encounters, but terror had stolen her voice. When the bear tugged more forcefully at the hammock's edge, the suspension system, designed for human weight distributed evenly across its length, failed catastrophically. One carabiner snapped free from its strap, collapsing that end of the hammock. Nicole tumbled unceremoniously to the ground, still partially wrapped in her sleeping bag, the breath knocked from her lungs as she landed hard on the forest floor. The sudden movement startled the bear, which huffed and stepped back momentarily. In that brief window of opportunity, Nicole's training finally broke through her paralysis. She scrambled to her knees, fighting to free herself from the sleeping bag while simultaneously making herself as large as possible. "Hey, go! Away!" Her voice, when it finally emerged, was a ragged, desperate shout that echoed through the trees. She clapped her hands together hard, the sharp sound cracking through the pre-dawn stillness. The bear hesitated, ears flicking forward with curiosity rather than the retreat Nicole had hoped for. It was too habituated to humans to be easily frightened by noise alone. After its initial startlement passed, it moved forward again, nose working actively to investigate this strange creature and determine if there might be food to be found. Nicole reached blindly for anything she could use as a deterrent. Her fingers closed around her aluminum water bottle and she hurled it at the bear without thinking. The bottle bounced harmlessly off the animal's shoulder, serving only to irritate rather than deter. The bear huffed again, this time with a hint of aggression, and took another step toward her. In the split second that followed, Nicole made a critical error. With the bear less than 10 feet away and closing, instinct overwhelmed training. She turned to run. For the bear, the sudden movement triggered a predatory response deeply encoded in its DNA. What might have been mere investigation transformed instantly into pursuit. 300 million years of evolutionary programming kicked in as the bear lunged forward, covering the distance between them in a heartbeat. Nicole felt a heavy weight slam into her back, driving her face first into the pine needles and dirt. Pain exploded across her shoulder as powerful jaws clamped down, teeth penetrating her fleece jacket and the skin beneath. Time seemed to fragment as Nicole's world narrowed to the overwhelming sensation of being in the grasp of a predator. The bear shook her violently, its teeth sinking deeper into the muscle of her left shoulder. A scream tore from her throat, primal and raw, cutting through the quiet mountain air. The pain was so intense, it created a strange sense of detachment, as though she were simultaneously experiencing and observing the attack. In her peripheral vision, Nicole caught sight of her headlamp, which had fallen nearby during her tumble from the hammock. With her right arm, the one not currently in the bear's jaws, she stretched desperately toward it, fingers scrabbling in the dirt. The movement caused the bear to adjust its grip, releasing her shoulder momentarily, only to clamp down again on her upper back. Fresh pain radiated from the new wound, but her fingers had closed around the headlamp. With a strength born of desperation, Nicole twisted partially onto her side and aimed the light directly into the bear's eyes, simultaneously pressing the button for the highest setting. The sudden, intense beam caused the animal to flinch and loosen its grip slightly. Nicole took advantage of the momentary distraction to scream again, this time with deliberate force and volume. "Help! Bear! Help me!" The commotion had not gone unnoticed at the nearby campsites. At the Johanssons' site, Carl awoke to the sounds of distress, initially confused but rapidly growing alarmed as he registered the human screams mixing with animal sounds. He fumbled for his flashlight and unzipped his tent, shouting for Melissa to wake up. "Someone's in trouble. There's a bear." He pulled on his boots without lacing them, grabbing the first potential weapon he could find, a cast-iron skillet they'd used for dinner. Melissa emerged from the tent behind him, her own flashlight scanning the darkness. "Tyler, Emma, stay in your tents," she called to their children, her voice tight with fear. In another campsite 50 yards away, Richard Oakes, a retired forest ranger from Oregon who was camping with his wife Barbara, had already sprung into action. With 30 years of experience in wildlife management, he assessed the situation with trained ears. "Bear attack," he said grimly to Barbara, reaching not for a flashlight, but for the canister of bear spray he kept within arm's reach when sleeping. "In bear country. Call 911 if you can get service. I'm going to help." The bear maintained its hold on Nicole, though its attention was now divided between its victim and the increasing disturbance from nearby. Nicole's strength was fading. The combination of blood loss, pain, and adrenaline crash threatening to overwhelm her. The headlamp had bought her seconds, not salvation. As the bear readjusted its grip again, teeth sinking into the flesh where her shoulder met her neck, Nicole was certain she was about to die. Then the night erupted with new sounds, human shouts. Growing louder, multiple flashlight beams cutting through the darkness, the heavy footfalls of people running toward the scene. Carl Johansson arrived first, his flashlight beam illuminating the terrifying tableau. A substantial black bear hunched over Nicole's prone form, her clothing torn and dark with blood, her face contorted in agony. "Hey, get away from her," Carl bellowed, banging the skillet against a nearby tree trunk, creating a deafening metallic clangor. The bear's head swung toward the new threat, its eyes reflecting the flashlight beams in eerie pinpoints of light. Richard Oakes arrived seconds, later instantly assessing the situation with experienced eyes. "Everyone make noise, make yourselves big. Move in slowly as a group," he commanded, naturally taking charge. "I have bear spray. I need to get closer without risking hitting the victim." Carl, Melissa, who had followed despite her fear, and two campers from another nearby site formed. An impromptu line, all shouting and raising their arms while advancing step by cautious step. Their combined presence, 4 adults with multiple light sources, creating a wall of noise and apparent size, finally penetrated the bear's focus on its victim. The animal released Nicole's shoulder and rose to its full height, her blood, dripping from its muzzle as it assessed this new development. For a tense moment, it seemed to consider charging the group, a potentially disastrous outcome. Richard removed the safety tab on his bear spray, prepared to discharge it if the bear advanced. Instead, After a few seconds that felt like eternities, to everyone involved, the bear dropped to all fours and lumbered away into the darkness between the trees, evidently deciding that whatever meal it might have secured wasn't worth the confrontation with multiple humans. As soon as the bear retreated, Richard rushed to Nicole's side, quickly checking her airway and the severity of her injuries while instructing the others. "Melissa, in my tent there's a first aid kit in the vestibule. Red bag. Bring it here now. Carl, keep watch in the direction the bear went. It might come back. Someone needs to run to the ranger station if we can't get cell service." Nicole was conscious but in shock, her breathing rapid and shallow, her skin clammy to the touch. Richard's experienced hands moved efficiently, assessing the puncture wounds on her shoulder and back. None appeared to have hit major arteries, a small mercy, but the injuries were serious and would require immediate medical attention. "You're going to be okay," Richard told her firmly, making eye contact to help ground her. "I'm Richard. I was a ranger for 30 years. We're going to take care of you. Can you tell me your name?" "Nicole," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Foster." "Good, Nicole. You're doing great. We need to control this bleeding and get you to a hospital. Are you camping alone? Is there someone we need to contact?" She nodded weakly. "Alone. My phone. In the tent." Melissa arrived with the first aid kit, and Richard immediately set to work cleaning and bandaging the wounds as best he could under the circumstances. The punctures were deep, and there was significant tissue damage where the bear had shaken her, but with direct pressure he managed to slow the bleeding. "I can't get any cell service," one of the other campers reported, returning from an attempt to call emergency services. "The ranger station is about 3 miles down the main road," Richard said, not looking up from his work on Nicole's injuries. "Someone needs to drive there now. Tell them we have a Code 3 bear attack victim, approximately 30-year-old female, multiple puncture wounds to the left shoulder and upper back, conscious but in shock. We need immediate medical evacuation." Carl volunteered immediately. "I'll go. Our SUV is right at the campsite." "Take Tyler with you," Melissa suggested, referring to their teenage son who had emerged from his tent despite instructions to stay put. "He can run in if there's any problem with the car." As Carl and Tyler departed for the ranger station, the rest of the group focused on keeping Nicole stable and maintaining vigilance for the bear's potential return. Barbara, Richard's wife, had brought additional blankets to help combat shock, carefully tucking them around Nicole's uninjured side. Emma Johansson, wide-eyed and frightened but wanting to help, had retrieved Nicole's phone from her tent and was holding it, along with a water bottle with a straw that they occasionally offered to Nicole's lips. "The bear," Nicole murmured, becoming more coherent as the initial shock began to subside, replaced by waves of throbbing pain. "It came to my hammock. I fell. I shouldn't have run." "You did everything you could," Richard assured her. "Black bears aren't usually predatory, but this one's behavior isn't normal. It's habituated to humans, probably been getting food rewards, not your fault." Time seemed to stretch as they waited for help to arrive. Richard continually monitored Nicole's condition, checking her pulse and the bandages for fresh bleeding. The eastern sky was just beginning to lighten with the first hint of dawn when they heard vehicles approaching on the access road. 2 ranger trucks arrived first, their headlights sweeping across the trees as they pulled as close to the campsite as the terrain would allow. Senior Ranger Elaine Martinez and her colleague Ranger James Wilson quickly assessed the situation, radioing for an update on the medical evacuation team that was en route. "Paramedics are about 15 minutes out with the ambulance," Martinez informed the group after checking Nicole's injuries. "There's a clearing about a half-mile from here where we can land a helicopter if needed, but let's see what the medics say when they get here." She turned to Richard, recognizing a fellow professional. "Good work on the first aid. You've probably saved her from much worse." While Wilson began taking statements from the witnesses to document the attack, Martinez pulled Richard aside. "What's your assessment of the bear? Based on the behavior you described and these injuries, we're potentially looking at a dangerous animal that needs to be removed." Richard frowned, considering. "Male black bear, I'd estimate around 200 pounds, young adult. The predatory response to movement is concerning. It didn't display the normal caution we'd expect. Given the campsite layout, I'd guess it was initially attracted to food at one of the neighboring sites, then encountered the victim by chance. But the fact that it actually attacked rather than just bluff charging suggests habituation to humans and possibly food conditioning." Martinez nodded grimly. "We've had reports of increased bear activity in this area over the past month, found evidence of them getting into garbage at the trailhead parking lots despite our bear-proof containers. We'll need to track this one." The paramedics arrived as predicted, their ambulance navigating the rough access road with difficulty before they continued on foot with their equipment. The two-person team, Alex Rivera and Sophia Patel, moved with the efficient synchronization of longtime partners, immediately taking over Nicole's care from Richard. Bear attack, female patient approximately 30 years old, multiple puncture, wounds to the left shoulder and upper back, underlying tissue damage from being shaken, responsive but experiencing shock and significant blood loss, Richard reported, handing off to the professionals. The paramedics established an IV line for fluids, administered pain medication, and performed a more thorough assessment of Nicole's injuries. After a brief consultation with their medical director via radio, they determined that ground transport would be sufficient, given that they had controlled the bleeding and her vital signs were stabilizing with treatment. "We'll transport her to St. Luke's in Boise," Rivera explained to the group as they prepared Nicole for the journey. "It's about a 2-hour drive, but they have the trauma services she'll need. The chopper's tied up with a cardiac case near Stanley, and the next closest one would take just as long to get here as will take to reach the hospital." As the paramedics worked, Ranger Martinez continued gathering information about the attack, now interviewing Nicole directly when the pain medication had taken effect enough for her to speak more clearly. "Can you tell me exactly what happened, Ms. Foster?" Martinez asked gently, her notepad ready. Nicole recounted the events as best she could, waking to find the bear investigating her hammock, the collapse, her attempts to scare it away, and the moment of panic that led her to run. "I know better," she said, tears welling in her eyes from a mixture of pain and self-recrimination. "I've taken wilderness safety courses. I just froze, and then I ran." "Don't blame yourself," Martinez said firmly. "Even experienced outdoors people can react instinctively in a crisis, and black bear predatory attacks are extremely rare. This isn't normal behavior." "All my food was in a bear canister," Nicole added. 50 yards from my campsite downwind. I did everything right." Martinez nodded, making notes. "It sounds like you did. We'll investigate the surrounding campsites. Bears that display this kind of behavior have usually been rewarded with human food in the past." She glanced meaningfully toward the Johansson campsite, where Ranger Wilson was currently documenting the improperly stored food. By the time Nicole was secured on the stretcher and ready for transport, the sun had fully risen, illuminating the devastation of her campsite, the collapsed hammock, scattered gear, and disturbing dark patches on the pine needle ground where her blood had soaked into the earth. The somber group watched as the paramedics carefully navigated the stretcher over the uneven terrain back to the waiting ambulance. Nicole, despite her injuries and the fog of medication, felt a sudden impulse to document what had happened. "My phone," she said, gesturing weakly. "Need pictures, evidence." Emma Johansson, still holding Nicole's phone, looked uncertainly at the paramedics. "It's important to her," Sophia Patel said, understanding the psychological component. "And it might help the Rangers. Just be quick." Emma unlocked the phone as directed by Nicole and took several photos of the campsite, the damaged hammock, and at Nicole's insistence, her injuries before they were completely bandaged. The teenager's hands trembled as she carried out this task, her face pale at the graphic reality of what had occurred. "Thank you," Nicole whispered, as Emma returned the phone, which Patel then secured in a bag with Nicole's other personal effects. The group prepared to depart, Nicole to the hospital, the Rangers to begin tracking the bear, and the campers to deal with the aftermath of the night's events. Carl Johansson approached the stretcher, his expression haunted. "I'm so sorry," he said, his voice breaking. "The Rangers found our cooler open, and Tyler's candy wrappers. We didn't secure our food properly. This might be our fault." Nicole, floating somewhere between clarity and confusion under the influence of the pain medication, could only stare at him, a complex mix of emotions crossing her face. Anger, forgiveness, resignation. "Learn from it," she finally managed. "Tell others." With that, the paramedics continued their journey to the ambulance, leaving Carl standing with the weight of his negligence heavy on his shoulders. The drive to Boise was a blur for Nicole, pain medications creating a hazy barrier between her and full consciousness. She was vaguely aware of the ambulance's movement, the occasional radio communications between the paramedics and the hospital, and Sophia Patel's reassuring presence, continually monitoring her condition and adjusting her IV fluids. "You're doing great, Nicole," Sophia would say periodically, checking her vital signs. "We're about halfway there now. The trauma team is ready for you when we arrive." In her semi-conscious state, Nicole's mind drifted between the immediate past and more distant memories. Her first solo camping trip in the Olympic National Forest 5 years earlier, the confidence she'd felt mastering outdoor skills, the peaceful moments alone in nature that had become essential to her well-being. Now those memories were tainted with the sensory flashbacks of the bear's hot breath on her skin, the crushing pressure of its jaws, the absolute certainty that she was about to die. Even in her medicated haze, she shivered at these intrusions. At St. Luke's Boise Medical Center, the trauma team was indeed waiting when the ambulance arrived. Dr. Eleanor Chen, the attending trauma surgeon, quickly took charge as Nicole was transferred from the ambulance stretcher to a hospital gurney. Bear attack victim, multiple puncture wounds to the left shoulder and upper back, significant tissue damage from being shaken, has received 1 liter of normal saline and 4 mg of morphine en route, Alex Rivera reported crisply as they moved. Vital signs stable, but she's lost a considerable amount of blood. Initial hemoglobin was 9.2 at the scene. Dr. Chen nodded, already examining the bandaged wounds, as nurses efficiently connected Nicole to the hospital's monitoring equipment. Let's get a full trauma panel. Type and cross for 2 units. Start a second large-bore IV and get her to CT. I need to see the extent of the tissue damage and make sure there's no injury to the subclavian vessels or brachial plexus. Nicole was faintly aware of being transferred onto different surfaces, bright lights overhead, and multiple voices asking her questions that she struggled to answer through the fog of pain and medication. So eventually, the initial flurry of activity subsided as the immediate assessment was completed, and she found herself in a curtained bay in the trauma center, awaiting further tests. A nurse named Michael was adjusting her IV when she became more fully conscious. "There you are," he said with a gentle smile, noticing her more focused gaze. "You're at St. Luke's in Boise. Do you remember what happened, Nicole?" "Bear," she whispered, her throat dry and raw from screaming during the attack. "It pulled down my hammock, bit me." "That's right, the doctor will be back soon to talk to you about your injuries and the treatment plan. Is there someone we can call for you? Family or friends who should know you're here?" Nicole closed her eyes briefly, considering. Her parents lived in Seattle, a full day's drive away. Her sister was currently traveling in Europe. Most of her friends in Boise were work colleagues, rather than close confidants. The reality of her somewhat solitary life had never felt more pronounced than in this moment of vulnerability. "My parents," she finally said, providing their contact information, which Michael carefully recorded. "But tell them not to come yet. Not until we know how bad it is. Dr. Chen will be able to give you a better idea of that soon," Michael assured her. "I know the wildlife officers were hoping to speak with you as well when you're feeling up to it. Apparently, this is a significant incident for their records." Nicole nodded weakly, then winced, as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through her injured shoulder. The local anesthetic the paramedics had administered was wearing off, bringing the full sensation of her injuries into sharper focus. Michael noticed immediately and administered additional pain medication through her IV. "This should help within a few minutes," he said. "Try to rest. The CT scan is being scheduled and Dr. Chen wants some x-rays as well." The next several hours passed in a blur of medical procedures. Nicole was transported to the radiology department for a CT scan of her shoulder and upper back, then for x-rays to check for any bone damage. Blood was drawn for various tests, and at one point, a wildlife disease specialist visited to discuss the potential for rabies exposure, ultimately determining that prophylactic treatment wasn't necessary given the nature of the attack and the low incidence of rabies in Idaho's black bear population. Late in the afternoon, Dr. Chen returned with the results of all the imaging and tests. By this time, Nicole was more alert, the initial shock having subsided, though the pain remained a constant presence, dulled only partially by medication. "Good news is there's no major vascular damage," Dr. Chen began, pulling up a stool beside Nicole's bed. "The bear's teeth missed your subclavian artery and the major vessels in your neck, which is extremely fortunate. The bad news is there's significant muscle damage to your trapezius and deltoid, and several deep puncture wounds that will need careful management to prevent infection." "Will I recover fully?" Nicole asked, her voice small but steadier than before. Dr. Chen's expression was cautiously optimistic. "With proper treatment and physical therapy, yes, I believe you will, but it's going to take time, and there will be scarring. We'll need to surgically debride the wounds, clean out any damaged tissue and thoroughly irrigate the punctures. Bear mouths harbor a lot of bacteria." "Surgery?" Nicole echoed, a new wave of anxiety washing over her. Yes, I'd like to take you to the operating room this evening. The sooner we clean these wounds properly, the better your outcome will be. We'll place some drains, repair the muscle damage where possible, and start you on powerful antibiotics. Dr. Chen paused, letting the information sink in. Do you have any questions about the procedure? Nicole had dozens of questions, but they tumbled together incoherently in her mind, overwhelmed by the reality of what had happened and what was still to come. She settled on the most immediate concern. How long will I be in the hospital? At least 3 to 5 days, depending on how the wounds look after surgery and whether there are any signs of infection. After discharge, you'll need follow-up, care and eventually physical therapy to regain full range of motion in your shoulder. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, solidly built man in the uniform of the Idaho Department of Fish and Game. He introduced himself as Wildlife Conservation Officer Mark Sutton. "Miss Foster, I apologize for the intrusion," he said, his manner professional but compassionate. "I know this isn't an ideal time, but I need to document your encounter with the bear while the details are still fresh. It helps us manage wildlife appropriately and prevent similar incidents in the future." Dr. Chen stood. "I'll give you some time to speak with Officer Sutton, and then we'll prepare you for surgery. A nurse will be in shortly with consent forms and to answer any other questions you might have." Once the doctor had left, Officer Sutton took the seat beside Nicole's bed, producing a digital recorder and a notepad. "Do you feel up to giving a statement about what happened? As much detail as you can remember would be helpful." Nicole nodded, and over the next 30 minutes she recounted the entire experience again, from the moment she awoke to find the bear investigating her hammock through to being rescued by the other campers. Sutton listened intently, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly allowing her to tell the story at her own pace. "Based on your description and the information from the rangers at the scene, we believe this was a predatory attack," Sutton explained when she had finished. "That's very rare for black bears, which is why it's particularly concerning. Most black bear encounters with humans involve bluff charges or defensive responses. When they feel threatened, what you described, the bear pursuing you when you ran and then maintaining its attack until driven off, that's predatory behavior." "What happens to the bear?" Nicole asked, surprised to find herself concerned about the animal's fate despite what it had done to her. Sutton's expression was grim. "The protocol for a predatory bear attack is clear. This animal has demonstrated that it views humans as potential prey, which makes it an unacceptable public safety risk. Our wildlife officers and U.S. Forest Service personnel are tracking it now. When located, it will be euthanized." A complex mixture of emotions crossed Nicole's face: relief at the removal of a threat, sadness for the animal that was simply following its instincts, and guilt that her presence in its territory had set these events in motion. "It's not the bear's fault," she said quietly. "The rangers said there was unsecured food at nearby campsites. It probably associated humans with easy meals." Sutton nodded. "That's almost certainly part of the issue. Bears that become food-conditioned lose their natural wariness of humans. But regardless of how it developed this behavior, a bear that makes predatory attacks on people cannot be relocated or rehabilitated. The risk is too great." He shifted topics, displaying more photos on his tablet. "The rangers documented the scene thoroughly, including these images of your campsite and the surrounding area. I noticed your food was properly stored in a bear canister away from your sleeping area." "That's exactly right. I always follow the guidelines," Nicole said, a hint of defensiveness creeping into her voice. "I've been backpacking for years. I know the risks." "I understand," Sutton assured her. "This wasn't your fault, Miss Foster. Wild animals can be unpredictable, and this bear's behavior was far outside the norm for its species. Even doing everything right as you did, sometimes these encounters still happen." After finishing his documentation and answering Nicole's questions about the likelihood of future bear encounters, statistically extremely rare, he emphasized, Officer Sutton provided her with information about victim services available through the state, including counseling resources for those who experience traumatic wildlife encounters. "What you've been through is both physically and psychologically traumatic," he explained. "Many people experience anxiety, flashbacks, or fear of returning to outdoor activities after such an event. These resources can help if you find yourself struggling with those effects." Nicole accepted the information numbly. The full psychological impact of the attack still held somewhat at bay by the immediate focus on her physical injuries. Before leaving, Sutton asked if she would be willing to participate in educational outreach about bear safety in the future, once she had recovered. "Your experience, combined with your existing outdoor knowledge, could be invaluable in helping. Others understand the importance of proper food storage and bear awareness, he suggested. But that's something to consider later, when you're feeling better. The idea planted a small seed in Nicole's mind, one that would germinate during her recovery in the weeks to come. As evening approached, the hospital staff began preparing Nicole for surgery. Her parents had been reached and were driving overnight from Seattle, expected to arrive by morning. A nurse administered pre-surgical medications that made Nicole increasingly drowsy, blunting the edges of her anxiety about the procedure ahead. As the orderlies arrived to transport her to the operating room, Nicole found herself thinking not of the bear or her injuries, but of the hammock. The peaceful swaying that had lulled her to sleep just 24 hours earlier, now potentially lost to her forever, replaced by the phantom sensation of falling and the memory of teeth in her flesh. Would she ever feel safe in the wilderness again? The question followed her into unconsciousness as the anesthesia took effect, leaving it unanswered for the moment. The surgery lasted just over 2 hours. Dr. Chen and her team meticulously debrided the wounds, removing damaged tissue, thoroughly irrigating the punctures, and repairing torn muscle where possible. They placed drains to prevent fluid accumulation and closed the wounds with multiple layers of sutures. Throughout the procedure, samples were taken for bacterial cultures to guide antibiotic therapy, and photographs were taken for medical documentation of the injuries. When Nicole awoke in the recovery room, the first sensation was pain, sharper and more localized than before, cutting through the lingering fog of anesthesia. A recovery nurse named Diane noticed her stirring and immediately came to her bedside. "You're in recovery, Nicole. The surgery went well. Try not to move your left arm or shoulder. I'll get you something more for pain." The administration of additional pain medication brought blessed relief, and Nicole drifted in and out of consciousness over the next hour as her body processed the anesthesia. By the time she was transferred to a regular hospital room, it was well after midnight, and exhaustion quickly pulled her back into sleep, despite the unfamiliar surroundings and the persistent discomfort of her injuries. She awoke to sunlight streaming through partially closed blinds and the sound of quiet conversation. Blinking away the heaviness of medicated sleep, Nicole focused on two familiar figures sitting in chairs near her bed. Her parents, David and Margaret Foster, their faces drawn with concern and the fatigue of overnight travel. "Mom? Dad?" Her voice was hoarse, her mouth dry from the combination of medications and surgical breathing tubes. They were instantly at her side, her mother taking her right hand, the uninjured side, while her father gently stroked her hair away from her forehead. "We're here, sweetheart," Margaret said, tears gathering in her eyes. "We came as soon as we heard." David Foster, his weathered face unusually pale, managed a strained smile. "You gave us quite a scare, Nick. How are you feeling?" "Like I got chewed up by a bear," Nicole replied, attempting humor though it fell flat against the reality of her situation. She winced as she tried to shift position, the movement sending fresh pain through her surgically repaired shoulder. Her mother immediately reached for the call button. "The nurse said to let them know when you woke up. They need to check your vitals and your pain level." A nurse named Hector arrived promptly, greeting Nicole with professional warmth as he checked her vital signs and the surgical drains. "Dr. Chen will be by on rounds in about an hour," he informed her, after documenting her pain level, a solid 7 out of 10, and administering medication through her IV. "Your parents can stay, but try to rest as much as possible. The first 24 hours after this kind of surgery are pretty rough." Once Hector had left, Nicole's parents filled her in on their journey and what they'd learned about the attack from hospital staff and the brief conversation they'd had with Officer Sutton when he stopped by to check on her earlier that morning. "He said you did everything right," David emphasized, clearly having worried that his daughter had made some crucial error that led to the attack. An avid outdoorsman himself, he had taught Nicole much of what she knew about wilderness safety. "And that black bear predatory attacks are extremely rare. 1 in a million, basically," Nicole murmured, the medication beginning to dull the worst of her pain. "Lucky me." Margaret squeezed her hand. "The doctor said you were actually very lucky in how the injuries occurred. The bear missed major blood vessels and nerves. They're expecting a good recovery, though it will take time." Nicole closed her eyes briefly, processing this information. "Did they find the bear?" she asked, opening her eyes again to see her parents exchange a glance. "Officer Sutton said they were still tracking it," her father replied carefully. "They found signs of it moving north through the wilderness area, away from the campgrounds." What David didn't share was the additional information Sutton had provided, that the tracking team had found evidence the bear had returned to the Johanssons' campsite after initially being driven away, demolishing their cooler and dragging food items into the woods, further confirmation of its habituation to human food sources. For the remainder of the morning, Nicole drifted between sleep and wakefulness, vaguely aware of her parents' presence and the periodic checks by hospital staff. When Dr. Chen arrived just before noon, Nicole was more alert, the worst of the anesthesia effects having finally dissipated. The surgery went very well, Dr. Chen reported after examining the wounds. We were able to clean everything thoroughly and repair the muscle damage. The cultures will take a day or two to come back, but we've started you on broad-spectrum antibiotics in the meantime. How bad is it really? Nicole asked, wanting an unvarnished assessment that she suspected her parents had not received. Dr. Chen's expression remained professional, but her tone softened slightly. You have 8 deep puncture wounds on your left shoulder and upper back, with significant soft tissue damage between them where the bear shook you. The sutures will stay in for at least 2 weeks, and the drains will remain until the output decreases, probably 3 to 4 days. There will be permanent scarring, and you're looking at 2 to 3 months of physical therapy to regain full range of motion and strength. She paused, making sure Nicole was processing the information. But given the nature of the attack, it could have been much worse. No major vessels were damaged, no nerves were severed, and there was no spinal involvement. With proper care and rehabilitation, I expect you to regain approximately 90 to 95% of your previous function. Nicole absorbed this prognosis silently, aware of her mother's barely suppressed distress beside her. When can I go back to work? She finally asked, thinking of her job as a software developer, her projects, her team, desk work. Could be possible in about 2 to 3 weeks, depending on your pain levels and how well the wounds are healing, Dr. Chen replied. But you'll need to keep the shoulder immobilized in a sling for at least that long to allow the muscle repairs to stabilize. No lifting, reaching, or overhead movements with that arm for 6 weeks minimum. The rest of the day passed in a blur of medical routines, vital sign checks, pain medication adjustments, brief visits from various specialists, including an infectious disease consultant and a physical therapist who discussed future rehabilitation plans. Nicole's parents remained by her side, taking turns stepping out for food or fresh air, their worry evident despite their attempts to maintain optimistic conversation. Late in the afternoon, a hospital social worker named Tara Daniels stopped by to discuss discharge planning and home care needs. The conversation quickly revealed a logistical challenge. Nicole lived alone in a second-floor apartment in downtown Boise, with no elevator access and no nearby family support. You'll need assistance with daily activities for at least the first 2 weeks after discharge, Tara explained. Dressing, bathing, meal preparation, these will all be difficult one-handed, especially while managing pain and medications. Before Nicole could formulate a response, her mother interjected, "She'll come home with us to Seattle. We have a guest, a room on the main floor, and I can take family leave from work to help care for her." Nicole frowned, instinctively resistant to the idea of returning to her parents' home at 32, regardless of the circumstances. "Mom, I can't just leave. My job and my apartment for weeks. There must be home health services or something." Tara nodded. "There are home health options, but they typically provide intermittent care, a visit once or twice a day, not round-the-clock assistance, and they can be quite expensive depending on your insurance coverage." A debate ensued, with Nicole insisting she could manage on her own with minimal help, and her parents equally insistent that she needed more comprehensive care than occasional home health visits could provide. The discussion was interrupted by the arrival of Officer Sutton, returning as promised for a follow-up conversation now that Nicole was more recovered from surgery. Recognizing the tension in the room, Sutton suggested that he could return later, but Nicole quickly seized on the distraction. "No, please come in. I'd like to hear if there's any update on the bear situation." With Nicole's parents reluctantly stepping into the hallway to give them privacy, Sutton took a seat beside his expression suggested news she might not want to hear. "We located the bear early this morning," he reported, "about 2 miles north of the campground area, following a ridgeline towards Stanley Lake. The tracking team was able to verify it was the same animal based on paw prints and scat containing food packaging material from the campsite." Nicole tensed, anticipating what would come next. "And the wildlife officers humanely euthanized it according to protocol," Sutton confirmed, his tone measured. "A field necropsy was performed to check for any underlying health issues that might have contributed to the unusual behavior, and samples were collected for disease testing, but preliminary findings indicate it was a healthy young adult male." "And Noe, The unexpected wave of emotions surged through Nicole, not relief as she might have expected, but a complex mixture of sadness and guilt. The bear had died because it had encountered humans who couldn't follow basic wilderness safety protocols, and then encountered her at the wrong moment. Despite her injuries, despite the trauma, she couldn't help but feel that the ultimate outcome was somehow unjust. "It was just being a bear," she said quietly, "doing what bears do when they find easy food sources." Sutton nodded, clearly familiar with this reaction. "That's true. In many ways, this was a preventable tragedy, which is actually what I wanted to discuss with you today." He pulled out a tablet, bringing up photos of the rangers' documentation of the surrounding campsites following the attack. The Johansson family has provided a full statement acknowledging their improper food storage. They're devastated about what happened and have expressed interest in making amends in some way, perhaps by contributing to your medical expenses or supporting bear conservation education. Nicole shook her head slightly. "I don't want their money. It was an accident. Careless, but still an accident." "That's very generous of you," Sutton said, "but their negligence did have serious consequences, both for you and for the bear. Which brings me to a proposal from our department." He explained that the Idaho Department of Fish and Game, in conjunction with the U.S. Forest Service, regularly conducted public education campaigns about wildlife safety, particularly focused on bear country etiquette. They had found that first-person accounts from attack survivors were particularly effective in helping the public understand the real consequences of improper food storage and wildlife habituation. "Once you've recovered, we'd like to invite you to participate in some of our educational outreach programs," Sutton proposed. "Your story, combined with your existing outdoor knowledge and the fact that you actually did everything correctly, makes you an ideal spokesperson. It wouldn't be a major time commitment, just occasional presentations at outdoor retailers, campground orientations, things like that." The idea resonated with Nicole in a way she hadn't expected. Throughout her career as a software developer, she had always enjoyed the training aspects of her job, teaching new team members, presenting at conferences. The thought of channeling her traumatic experience into something constructive, something that might prevent similar incidents in the future, held immediate appeal. "I'd like that," she said, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "I'd want to focus on education, not fear. Bears aren't monsters. They're just wild animals responding to the situations we create." Sutton smiled, clearly pleased with her response. "That's exactly the attitude we need. Too many people come away from wildlife encounters with either an inflated sense of danger or a diminished respect for wild animals. Finding that middle ground of informed respect is the goal." They discussed the possibility in broader terms, with Sutton emphasizing that there would be no pressure or timeline. Everything would depend on Nicole's recovery and comfort level. He left his contact information and some educational materials about black bears in Idaho for her to review when she felt up to it. After Sutton's departure, Nicole's parents returned, clearly curious about the extended conversation. When Nicole explained the outreach proposal, her father looked concerned. "Are you sure that's a good idea, Nick? Reliving the attack over and over to educate strangers?" "I think it might actually help me process it," Nicole replied thoughtfully. "Give some meaning to what happened, and maybe save some bears from being shot because people are careless with their food." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "You've always been one to find the lesson in difficult experiences. If you feel this is something you want to do, we'll support you." The conversation returned to the immediate concern of Nicole's post-hospital care, but with a subtle shift in dynamics. Seeing her daughter's resolve about the outreach program had reminded Margaret of Nicole's independence and resilience, qualities that would be important in her recovery as well. "What if we compromise?" Margaret suggested. "You come to Seattle for the first week after discharge, just until the drains are removed and you're more comfortable with the wound care. Then we come to Boise and stay at your place for another week to help you transition back to independence. After that, we assess whether you need more support or can manage with periodic home health visits." It was a reasonable proposal, and Nicole found herself without the energy to argue for complete independence. The reality of her injuries and the challenges of recovery were beginning to sink in more fully, making her mother's offer increasingly appealing. "Okay," she conceded. "1 week in Seattle, then we reassess. But I need to check with work about taking medical leave." The next few days in the hospital followed a predictable pattern of incremental improvement mixed with setbacks. The surgical drains were producing less fluid, indicating healing, but cultures from the wounds revealed a polymicrobial infection requiring a change in antibiotics. Physical therapy began with gentle, passive range of motion exercises that left Nicole sweating and nauseated from pain despite medication. The staples and sutures pulled uncomfortably with every minor movement, and sleeping was a challenge given. The requirement to keep her shoulder elevated and immobilized. Throughout this period, Nicole's thoughts returned repeatedly to the bear encounter, her mind reviewing the sequence of events, searching for the point where different actions might have led to different outcomes. If she hadn't frozen initially, if she hadn't run, if she had made more noise earlier. The what-ifs circled relentlessly, disrupting her sleep with vivid dreams of teeth and claws and the sensation of falling. On the third night after surgery, a particularly intense nightmare woke her, the bear in her hospital room, standing beside her bed, reaching for her with human-like intentionality. Her scream brought a night nurse running, and it took several minutes for Nicole to fully orient herself to reality, her heart racing so violently she feared the sutures in her shoulder might tear from the pulsing blood pressure. "This is normal after trauma," the nurse assured her, after checking her vital signs and wounds. "Your brain is trying to process what happened. Would you like me to ask the doctor about something to help you sleep?" Nicole hesitated, then nodded. The lack of restful sleep was impeding her physical recovery, and the nightmares were becoming increasingly distressing. The doctor on call prescribed a mild sedative, which helped her achieve a few hours of dreamless sleep before the morning. Hospital routines began again. On the fourth day post-surgery, Dr. Chen determined that the drains could be removed, a minor procedure performed at the bedside that was uncomfortable but quick. The wounds were healing well despite the infection, which appeared to be responding to the new antibiotic regimen. Discharge planning began in earnest, with prescriptions prepared, follow-up appointments scheduled, and detailed instructions provided for wound care and activity restrictions. The most important thing is to protect these repairs while they heal, Dr. Chen emphasized during her final examination of Nicole's shoulder. That means strict compliance with the sling, no lifting or reaching with the left arm, and following the physical therapy protocol exactly as prescribed. No more, no less. Trying to push your recovery faster will only set you back. Nicole, eager to regain her independence, nodded her understanding. "When will I be able to return to outdoor activities? Hiking? Camping?" Dr. Chen considered the question thoughtfully. From a physical standpoint, light hiking on established trails could be possible in about 2 months. Assuming your rehabilitation goes well, more strenuous activities would be at least 3 to 4 months away. She paused, her expression softening slightly. "But the physical readiness may not align with your psychological readiness. Many people experience anxiety or fear when returning to activities associated with traumatic events. That's something to be mindful of as you recover." It was a possibility Nicole had considered, but was reluctant to fully acknowledge that, beyond the physical injuries, the attack might have damaged her relationship with the wilderness she loved. Would she ever again feel the peace and solitude of a forest without the accompanying shadow of fear? It was a question that would remain unanswered for now. The day of discharge arrived, 5 days after Nicole had been admitted following the bear attack. The morning was consumed with final examinations, paperwork, and detailed instructions for home care. A hospital pharmacist reviewed her medications, oral antibiotics to continue for 10 more days, pain management with gradually decreasing dosages, anti-inflammatory drugs, and a short course of the sleep aid that had proven helpful. Nicole's father had rented a comfortable SUV for the 8-hour drive to Seattle, with the back seat arranged so Nicole could recline as needed. The hospital provided a special pillow designed to support her injured shoulder during travel. By early afternoon, she was settled in the vehicle, exhausted from the morning's activities, but relieved to be leaving the institutional environment of the hospital. As they drove through Boise toward the interstate, Nicole watched the familiar landmarks of her adopted city pass by, feeling a strange disconnection from the normal life they represented. In less than a week, her entire reality had shifted, from an independent professional with an active outdoor lifestyle to someone dependent on others for basic needs, her body permanently marked by an encounter with the wild. The drive to Seattle was long and uncomfortable despite David's careful attention to avoiding bumps and sharp turns. They stopped frequently for Nicole to stretch her legs and take medication, each stop requiring careful maneuvering to exit the vehicle without jarring her shoulder. By the time they reached the Foster family home in the Ravenna neighborhood of Seattle, it was nearly midnight, and Nicole was pale with exhaustion and pain. Her parents had prepared the main floor guest room with extra pillows for elevation, a side table arranged with medications and water, and a bell to summon help if needed during the night. Margaret helped Nicole change into fresh pajamas, a humbling process that revealed the full extent of her injuries in the harsh bathroom light. The surgical sites were still covered with bandages, but the surrounding skin was mottled with bruises in various stages, yellows and purples extending well beyond the actual bite wounds. "Oh, sweetheart," Margaret murmured, helping Nicole ease the right arm of the pajama top on first, then carefully working the fabric around the immobilized left arm. "I had no idea it was so extensive." Nicole avoided looking at her reflection in the mirror, focusing instead on the practical task at hand. "The bruising looks worse than it feels," she lied, unwilling to acknowledge the throbbing pain that radiated from her shoulder down to her fingertips and up into her neck. Once settled in bed, propped on pillows to keep the shoulder elevated, Nicole found herself unexpectedly emotional. The familiar surroundings of her childhood home, her mother's gentle care, the absolute safety of this space so far removed from wilderness threats, it all combined to crack the stoic facade she had maintained throughout her hospitalization. "I was so scared, Mum," she admitted, tears slipping down her cheeks. "When it had me, I was certain I was going to die. I kept thinking about you and Dad finding out from some ranger's phone call, about all the things I still wanted to do." Margaret sat on the edge of the bed, carefully taking Nicole's right hand. "But you didn't die. You survived and you're going to heal. And we're right here with you through all of it." The emotional release, combined with the exhaustion of travel and the effects of her evening pain medication, finally allowed Nicole to drift into sleep, her mother maintaining a quiet vigil until she was certain her daughter was resting comfortably. The week in Seattle established a new rhythm for Nicole's recovery. Mornings began with her father helping her through a cautious showering process, using a special waterproof cover for the surgical sites and a shower chair to prevent falls. Her mother changed bandages and helped with dressing, a process that gradually became less awkward as they established efficient routines. Physical therapy exercises, though still painful, were performed religiously 3 times daily, with her parents providing both encouragement and restraint when Nicole was tempted to push beyond prescribed limits. Friends from Nicole's high school and college years visited, bringing food, books, and welcome distraction from the monotony of recovery. Her boss and team members from the software company sent a lavish gift basket and conducted a video call to assure her that her projects were being covered and her job was secure for whenever she was ready to return. Throughout this period, Nicole found herself increasingly drawn to the educational materials Officer Sutton had provided about black bears in Idaho. She read about their biology, behavior patterns, habitat needs, and the increasing challenges they faced as human development encroached on their territories. She researched statistics on bear attacks, confirming what Sutton had told her about their rarity, especially predatory attacks by black bears. The information provided a framework for understanding her experience that somehow made it more manageable, less a random act of nature's cruelty, and more a complex interaction of specific circumstances, unfortunate timing, and predictable animal behavior. By the end of the week in Seattle, Nicole had made significant progress both physically and emotionally. The surgical sites were healing well with no signs of continued infection. Her pain levels had decreased enough to reduce medication, and she was sleeping better with fewer nightmares. Most importantly, she was regaining confidence in her ability to care for herself, learning one-handed techniques for daily tasks, and becoming more comfortable managing her limitations. After a follow-up appointment with a Seattle-based orthopedic surgeon who pronounced her recovery right on track, Nicole and her parents discussed the next phase of the plan. True to their agreement, Margaret and David would return to Boise with Nicole, staying at her apartment for another week before reassessing her need for continued support. The return journey to Boise was markedly easier than the initial trip to Seattle, with Nicole more accustomed to her limitations and better able to manage her comfort during travel. Arriving at her downtown apartment building, however, presented the first major challenge: 2 flights of stairs to reach her unit. With her father on one side and her mother trailing close behind with bags, Nicole navigated the stairs slowly, one at a time, the effort leaving her sweating and lightheaded by the time they reached her door. "Maybe we should look into a ground floor option or a building with an elevator," Margaret suggested, concerned by Nicole's pallor. "I'll be fine," Nicole insisted, though she privately acknowledged that the stairs would be a significant daily obstacle during her recovery. "It'll get easier as I heal, and it's good exercise." Inside the apartment, everything was exactly as she had left it 2 weeks earlier when departing for what was supposed to. be a relaxing weekend camping trip. Her backpacking gear, what had been recovered from the campsite, had been delivered by the rangers and sat in a pile near the door, the sight of it sending an unexpected chill through Nicole. Her hammock was conspicuously absent, presumably too damaged to salvage or still held as evidence of the attack. That evening, as they settled into the apartment, Nicole in her bedroom, her parents on the pull-out sofa in the living room, she received an email from Officer Sutton. The subject line read simply, "Bear Incident Follow-Up." The message was brief but informative. The necropsy results on the bear had confirmed it was a healthy young male with no underlying conditions that would explain its unusual behavior. Its stomach contents had included both natural foods and human food items, confirming its habituation. Sutton also shared that the Johansson family had made a substantial donation to a wildlife education program focused on reducing human-bear conflicts, specifically requesting that the funds be directed toward initiatives in the Sawtooth area where the attack had occurred. "If you're still interested in participating in our educational outreach once you've recovered," Sutton wrote, "please let me know. Your perspective would be invaluable, and we could work around your schedule and comfort level." Nicole found herself composing a reply immediately, confirming her interest and suggesting they connect again in a month or so when she would have a better sense of her recovery timeline. As she typed one-handed, awkwardly but with determination, she realized that this potential contribution had become important to her, a way to extract meaning from her suffering and perhaps prevent similar incidents in the future. The week with her parents in Boise established a new normal for Nicole. Her father helped rearrange furniture to create clearer pathways and moved frequently used items to accessible locations. Her mother prepared and froze individual meals that could be easily reheated one-handed. Together, they developed systems for laundry, cleaning, and other household tasks that Nicole would need to manage on her own. As her strength and mobility gradually improved, Nicole began venturing out of the apartment for short walks around her downtown neighborhood, initially with her parents, but eventually alone, small steps toward reclaiming her independence. She replaced the backpacking gear that had been damaged in the attack, a symbolic act of determination that she would eventually return to the activities she loved, albeit with a heightened awareness of the potential dangers. Her boss at the TE software company arranged for a part-time work-from-home schedule to begin the following week, providing a welcome mental engagement without the physical demands of commuting and a full office day. Colleagues set up her home workspace with an ergonomic arrangement that accommodated her limited mobility, and projects were selected that could be managed efficiently with reduced typing capacity. By the end of the second week in Boise, Nicole and her parents agreed that she could manage independently, with periodic visits from a home health aide for assistance with bandage changes and more challenging household tasks. Margaret and David returned to Seattle with plans to visit again in 2 weeks, leaving Nicole with mixed feelings of anxiety and determination about navigating her recovery alone. The first few days on her own were challenging but manageable. The home health aide, a capable and cheerful woman named Rosa, visited every other day to help with wound care and to check on Nicole's overall well-being. Physical therapy appointments 3 times weekly provided both rehabilitation and human connection. Work offered mental engagement that helped distract from physical discomfort and prevented excessive rumination on the attack. Yet, in the quiet evenings alone in her apartment, Nicole found her thoughts returning repeatedly to the bear encounter, often triggered by the most innocuous things: the sound of a neighbor's dog scratching at their door, the shadow of tree branches moving on her bedroom wall, the sensation of her blankets shifting as she dozed off to sleep. These moments would catapult her back to the hammock, to the feeling of falling, to the weight of the bear on her back, and the searing pain of its teeth. On the third night alone, after a particularly vivid flashback while trying to fall asleep, Nicole found herself reaching for her phone and opening the photo gallery. She had not looked at the images Emma Johansson had taken of her injuries immediately after the attack, had actively avoided them during her hospitalization and time with her parents. Now, sitting up in bed with her heart racing from the memory of teeth in her flesh, she felt compelled to confront the visual reality of what had happened. The photos were graphic and jarring: her torn clothing, saturated with blood, puncture wounds visible where the fabric had been cut away, her face pale and shocked in the early morning light. The collapsed hammock and scattered gear provided context for the violence that had occurred. Nicole studied the images methodically, forcing herself to look directly at each one, to acknowledge the reality they represented. Strangely, Rather than intensifying her anxiety, the concrete visual evidence seemed to help contain it. These were specific injuries that were now healing, a specific event that was now over, not the shapeless terror that haunted her dreams. She found herself thinking of the bear as well, now dead because of their encounter. In one of the photos, barely visible at the edge of the frame, was a paw print in the soft earth near her campsite, the literal impression left by the animal that had so profoundly marked her body and psyche. Nicole zoomed in on this detail, studying the shape and size of the print, the clarity of the claw marks at its upper edge. This too was specific and real, not a monster, but a wild animal following its instincts in a world increasingly shaped by human presence. That night, she slept better than she had since the attack. The confrontation with the photographic evidence somehow allowing her mind to begin categorizing the experience as memory rather than ongoing threat. The nightmares didn't disappear entirely, but they became less frequent and less intense in the days that followed. 3 weeks after the attack, Nicole had her first major follow-up appointment with Dr. Chen. The surgical sites were healing, well, with no signs of infection and good initial tissue repair. Physical therapy was progressing, with Nicole now able to perform gentle, active range of motion exercises rather than just passive movements. The constant pain had subsided to a more manageable level, requiring medication only at night or after particularly challenging therapy sessions. "You're doing remarkably well," Dr. Chen told her after the examination. "Based on your progress, I think we can set some tentative milestones for your recovery. If all continues as expected, you could return to full-time work in another 2 to 3 weeks, begin more advanced strengthening exercises in 6 weeks, and potentially resume light hiking by the 3-month mark." Nicole felt a surge of optimism at this timeline, more concrete than previous estimates. "What about backpacking, camping?" Dr. Chen considered the question thoughtfully. "Physically, I'd say 4 to 6 months minimum before attempting anything with a heavy pack or extended duration. But I have to ask, are you experiencing any psychological effects from the attack? Anxiety, flashbacks, nightmares? Those factors might influence your readiness to return to remote outdoor activities as much as the physical healing." Nicole hesitated, then decided on honesty. "I've had some nightmares and flashbacks, yes, but they're getting less intense. And I've been looking at resources for wilderness first aid and bear safety, thinking about what I could do differently in the future." "That's a healthy approach," Dr. Chen noted. "Still, I'd recommend speaking with someone who specializes in trauma recovery before you attempt overnight wilderness trips again. Physical healing is only part of the equation after an experience like yours." Nicole agreed to consider this suggestion, thinking of the counseling resources Officer Sutton had provided. Perhaps there was wisdom in addressing both aspects of her recovery deliberately, rather than assuming the psychological impacts would resolve on their own. As Nicole continued to heal over the subsequent weeks, she gradually increased her work, hours, and social activities. Friends who had been kept at a distance during the acute phase of her recovery were now welcomed for dinner or movie nights. Her parents visited for a weekend, pleased with her progress and less anxious about her ability to manage independently. 6 weeks after the attack, Nicole received a call from Officer Sutton. The Idaho Department of Fish and Game was planning a series of bear awareness workshops at outdoor retailers throughout the state, scheduled to begin in a month. Would Nicole be interested in participating in the Boise event, sharing her experience? As part of the educational program, we'd keep it focused on prevention and proper wilderness practices, Sutton assured her. No sensationalism or graphic details, just your perspective on the importance of food storage, awareness in bear country, and how to respond if an encounter occurs. Nicole agreed without hesitation, feeling ready to transform her experience into something constructive. Over the following weeks, she worked with Sutton to develop a concise, effective presentation that emphasized key safety messages without dwelling unnecessarily on the attack itself. They chose a few of the less graphic photos to illustrate important points, and Nicole practiced delivering her portion of the presentation with a balance of personal authenticity and educational purpose. The workshop was held at a large REI store in Boise on a Saturday afternoon in October, almost exactly 2 months after the attack. The audience consisted of about 30 people, ranging from experienced backpackers to families planning their first camping trips. Sutton began with general information about bear species in Idaho, their behaviors, habitats, and the increasing challenges of human-wildlife coexistence. When it was Nicole's turn to speak, She moved to the front of the group with a calm confidence that belied her internal nervousness. Her left arm was no longer in a sling, though she still had significant limitations in its movement and strength. The surgical scars were hidden beneath her long-sleeved shirt, but their presence informed every word she spoke. 2 months ago, I was an experienced backpacker on a routine weekend trip in the Sawtooths, she began, her voice steady. I'd been camping and hiking for years without incident. I followed all the proper protocols for food storage and campsite selection, and yet I found myself in a life-threatening situation with a black bear at dawn on a Saturday morning, very much like this one. She recounted the attack succinctly, emphasizing the bear's habituation to human food from nearby campsites and her own critical error in running when confronted by the animal. She showed selected photos of the aftermath, focusing on the improperly stored food at adjacent campsites rather than her injuries. The bear that attacked me was euthanized, she concluded, not because it was unusually aggressive or predatory by nature, but because it had learned associations between humans and food that made it dangerous. That bear died because of human errors, not mine on that particular morning, but the accumulated effect of many small, careless actions by many different people over time. And I'll carry the scars of those errors for the rest of my life. She paused, letting the message sink in before shifting to a more constructive tone. But I'm not here to assign blame or make anyone afraid of enjoying our beautiful wilderness areas. I'm here because proper food storage and bear awareness save lives, both human and bear. These simple practices make all the difference. Nicole then demonstrated proper food storage techniques, discussed optimal campsite selection in bear country, and explained the correct responses to different types of bear encounters. Throughout her presentation, she emphasized respect for wildlife and personal responsibility rather than fear. The audience response was overwhelmingly positive. Many attendees approached Nicole afterward with questions or to share their own wilderness experiences. Several thanked her for the specific safety information, saying they had been unaware of proper protocols despite years of camping. The store manager, impressed with the presentation, invited Nicole to return for future workshops. In the weeks and months that followed, Nicole continued her dual recovery, physical rehabilitation steadily increasing her strength and range of motion, while periodic participation in educational outreach helped process the psychological impacts of the attack. She spoke at several more workshops, each presentation becoming more refined and effective. She consulted with a trauma specialist, developing strategies for managing flashbacks and anxiety, particularly in situations that triggered memories of the attack. 4 months after the bear encounter, Dr. Chen cleared Nicole for light hiking, provided she used trekking poles for stability and avoided remote areas alone. Her first venture back onto a trail, a popular route in the foothills just outside Boise, was both terrifying and exhilarating. Every rustle in the underbrush caused her heart to race, and she found herself constantly scanning her surroundings with a vigilance that precluded the peaceful immersion in nature she had previously enjoyed. Yet with each subsequent hike, the acute anxiety diminished slightly. Nicole developed new habits and awareness that gradually became second nature, making noise on blind curves, carrying bear spray accessible on her hip belt, studying fresh animal signs with knowledgeable interest rather than fear. She accepted that her relationship with the wilderness had been fundamentally altered by her experience, but was determined not to surrender the activities that had been a core part of her identity and well-being. 6 months after the attack, in February of the following year, Nicole received an unexpected email. The Johansson family, whose improperly stored food had likely contributed to the bear's habituation, had continued their involvement with wildlife education initiatives. They were organizing a weekend workshop specifically for novice family campers, focused on responsible wilderness practices, and wondered if Nicole would be willing to participate as a presenter. The request gave Nicole pause. She had never directly blamed the Johanssons for what happened, recognizing that many factors had contributed to the circumstances of the attack, but she also hadn't spoken with them since that morning when Carl had apologized as she was being taken to the ambulance. The prospect of a direct interaction stirred complex emotions. After consideration, she agreed to participate, seeing it as an opportunity for closure as much as education. The workshop was scheduled for March at an outdoor education center near Boise, consisting of classroom sessions on Saturday and a guided overnight camping experience on Sunday for those who wished to practice their new skills. When Nicole arrived at the center that Saturday morning, she was surprised to find nearly 40 participants. Not just the Johansson family, but several other families as well, all eager to learn how to camp safely and responsibly. Carl Johansson approached her immediately, his expression a mixture of anxiety and gratitude. "Ms. Foster, Nicole, thank you for coming," he said, extending his hand tentatively. "I wasn't sure you'd want anything to do with us after what happened." Nicole shook his hand, noting the genuine remorse in his eyes. "What happened wasn't just about your family, Mr. Johansson. It was about a pattern of human behavior that affects how wild animals interact with us. That's why I'm here, to help break that pattern." Carl nodded, visibly relieved by her response. "We've learned so much since then. That's why we wanted to organize this, to pass it on to other families before they make the same mistakes." Throughout the day, Nicole observed the Johanssons, actively participating in all the training sessions: proper food storage, campsite selection, wildlife awareness, emergency preparedness. Tyler and Emma, the teenage children, had developed a particular interest in conservation, creating a presentation of their own about minimizing human impact in wilderness areas. During the afternoon break, Emma approached Nicole somewhat shyly. "I don't know if you remember, but I took the pictures of your injuries with your phone," she said. "I've thought about that a lot, about how you looked so hurt but still wanted to document everything." Nicole nodded, the memory vivid. "I remember. That was really helpful of you. I'm studying biology now," Emma continued. "I want to work in wildlife conservation someday. What happened to you and that bear, it changed how I think about a lot of things." This revelation struck Nicole deeply. The idea that her traumatic experience had influenced this young woman's life direction, potentially toward work that would protect both wildlife and humans. It suggested a ripple effect extending far beyond her individual recovery, creating meaning from what could otherwise have been merely tragic. As the workshop concluded, Nicole found herself reflecting on the journey of the past 6 months. Her shoulder still ached in cold weather, and she had permanent scars where the bear's teeth had punctured her flesh. Her psychological recovery remained a work in progress. Certain sounds or sensations could still trigger momentary panic, and she doubted she would ever again sleep as carelessly in the wilderness as she once had. Yet there had been unexpected positive outcomes as well. Her participation in educational outreach had revealed a talent and passion for teaching that she had not previously recognized. Her bond with her parents had deepened through the vulnerability of recovery. Her appreciation for life, its fragility and preciousness, had intensified in the wake of her close encounter with mortality. That evening, after the workshop participants had departed to prepare for the next day's camping experience, Nicole stood in the parking lot of the education center, gazing toward the distant outline of the Sawtooth Mountains, barely visible on the horizon. Somewhere in those peaks, the bear that had attacked her had roamed for 3 years, living according to instincts honed by millennia of evolution, instincts now permanently interrupted by its encounter with the human world. Nicole thought of the paw print captured in the photo from her campsite, the literal impression left by the animal that had so profoundly marked her existence. In some ways they had left impressions on each other, hers now manifested in educational programs that might protect other bears from similar fates, his permanently etched on her body and psyche. As she turned to walk to her car, Nicole felt the familiar pull and catch of scar tissue across her shoulder. The pain had diminished over time, but the physical reminder would remain with her always, as would the memory of those moments suspended between life and death beneath the pines of the Sawtooth Mountains. She had lost something in that encounter, a certain innocence about her place in the natural world, but had gained something too, a deeper understanding of the complex, sometimes dangerous, always meaningful relationship between humans and the wilderness we both cherish and transform. In the mountain forests of Idaho, other bears continued their age-old patterns of survival, largely invisible to the humans who shared their territory. But through Nicole's scars and stories, through the Johanssons' transformed awareness, through each workshop participant who learned to store food properly or respond appropriately to wildlife, the boundary between human and wild became a little less hazardous for the creatures on both sides, a small but significant legacy from a brief, violent intersection of two very different worlds.